The remaining 100 or so kilometers of their journey on the embroidered flower river was peaceful and smooth sailing. When Chen Ping'an and the others disembarked, Li Huai and Lin Shui were already carrying brand-new bookcases. Along with Li Baoping, they were now increasingly living up to their so-called journeys with books on their back. As a result, Chen Ping'an now looked like a young servant for children from large and powerful clans. If one didn't see with their own eyes, one would find it hard to imagine that the young boy was actually a practicing martial artist. Moreover, he was a martial artist who had resoundingly defeated the martial arts subordinate of a county magistrate of the Great Li Empire. In fact, the martial arts subordinate hadn't even been able to throw a single punch. When they disembarked the ship, this martial arts subordinate had been carried off on a stretcher. Before disembarking, Chen Ping'an had already studied a geomancy map of the area carefully. He didn't plan to travel through Wanping County town. Instead, they would take a detour around the town and continue south through a magnificent mountain range. This section of the journey would take them approximately half a month on foot. Chen Ping'an had asked around on the ship, and he had learned that there was a mountain path that they could follow. However, it would be far more difficult to traverse than the bluestone path that snaked through Go Table Mountain. Horse carriages wouldn't fit, and most people walked this path with donkeys or mules. If they didn't choose this mountain path, then they would have to pass through a county town. However, Lin Shui said that he was yet to comprehend the Yang talismans, so he would be unable to conceal the innate Yin energy of the Yin god. As such, the Yin god wouldn't be able to enter the county town. According to Aoyang, it was very likely that the city god pavilion, the Confucian temple, the martial sage temple, and the residence of the general would all naturally ostracize the Yin god. If a mighty figure was present in the county town, then it was also likely that they would face some complications. As they walked, they continued to ask the passers-by for directions. During these times, Chen Ping'an would also probe the villagers about whether there were any strange legends relating to these mountains. For example, whether there were mountain ghosts present. When the villagers saw that they were 4 young children, with all of them carrying bookcases, they treated them as young students from rich families who had run out to adventure. They smiled as they introduced the surrounding mountains and waters to Chen Ping'an and the others. They said that these places didn't even have names, so how could there possibly be ghosts or spirits? At the very least, they had never heard anything of the sort before. In the end, most of the villagers suggested that they visit the river god shrine by the embroidered flower river. They claimed that drawing fortune sticks and praying to the god there was very effective, and perhaps there was genuinely a mighty river god watching over them. The county magistrate would also lead a delegation of people to worship the river god each year. On this day, the deafening bangs of firecrackers would resonate throughout the sky, and the atmosphere in the area would be as lively as could be. The 4 children arrived before the mountain range at noon. Standing in front of the mountains, Li Huai bowed with cupped hands before vigorously bowing another 3 times. Looking up and seeing no movement from Chen Ping'an, he asked in puzzlement, "Chen Ping'an, didn't you bow before entering Go Table Mountain last time? You said you were paying respects to the mountain god. So why are you slacking off this time?" Chen Ping'an hesitated for a moment before eventually replying, "I frequently entered the mountains with Old Man Yang in the past, so I managed to pick up some skills in terms of observing the mountains and tasting clay. When he was in a good mood, he would talk to me about the forms and directions of the mountains. He said that there are many considerations when it comes to the location where a mountain god places their gold statue or whatnot. If we want to know whether there's a mountain god residing in a mountain, we can roughly determine this by carefully observing the mountain before we enter. Moreover, the locals all said that there's nothing strange about these mountains, so I can more or less confirm that this isn't the territory of a mountain god." Lin Shui suddenly recalled something and he added, "The Yin god told me that each empire can only have a limited number of formal mountain gods and river gods. There can't be gods and deities everywhere. Otherwise, they'll run rampant and eventually cause catastrophe, bringing chaos and complexity to the fortune of a region. Moreover, the conflict between mountains and rivers is similar to how people fight over land and water sources. If there are too many gods, then things actually become detrimental for the empires. Thus, mountain gods won't appear in places that aren't explicitly recorded in the local county chronicles." Li Huai was slightly disappointed and he sighed, and I still wanted to collect a few more painted puppets." As it turned out, The disaster turned into a fortune in Go Table Mountain that had resulted in Li Huai receiving a lively painted puppet, had caused him to feel eager with anticipation. He was eager to receive a painted puppet for each mountain that he visited. If that were the case, then wouldn't his small bookcase be filled with puppets by the time he reached the academy in Great Sui Nation? Otherwise, if there were only a single puppet and a single book in his bamboo bookcase, things would seem a little too empty. And you still had the gall to call Chen Ping'an miserly before? Lin Shui chuckled in indignation. I never said that. I simply said that Chen Ping'an is a virtuous person who makes his fortune in a proper way. Li Huai retorted with a guileless look. How obsequious! Lin Shui humped coldly. Lin Hai was enraged and he shouted, If it wasn't for me begging and pleading, would you have been able to get a small bamboo bookcase? Lin Shui, have some conscience, will you? Shut up, Li Baoping snapped. Chen Ping'an would practice walking meditation whenever there was no one around. However, he didn't dare to make big movements because he was carrying a large basket on his back. As a result, he would slow down his pace whenever he could. Moreover, when teaching him the 18 stops in Pillow Relay Station, Aoyang had also told him that being slow was the essence of this technique. Now that he was stuck between the 6th stop and the 7th stop, not able to overcome this barrier no matter what, Chen Ping'an decided to practice the walking meditation of the mountain shaking fist technique first. After entering the mountains and walking for approximately 4 hours, Li Huai was already panting heavily. Li Baoping was also huffing and puffing. Chen Ping'an understood that this was the limit of their single breath. 1. Since they were coincidentally passing by a creek, he decided to stop there for a rest. Lin Shui was calm and relaxed, and there were only a few beads of sweat on his forehead. This was as expected of someone who had set foot on the path of cultivation. It was just that he still couldn't compare to Chen Ping'an. After they all found a spot to sit down, Chen Ping'an retrieved Li Baoping's saber from his large basket. This was the slender saber that Aoyang had referred to as auspicious talisman. Even though he had called this a bottom-rank saber, Chen Ping'an was no blind fool, and he was instead someone who was extremely familiar with kitchen knives and machetes. In fact, he had even borrowed Ning Yao's skirt dagger for a period of time. Thus, he knew that this saber was definitely very valuable. Whenever there was no one around, he would retrieve the small dragon-slaying platform that had mysteriously appeared in his basket, and use it to carefully sharpen the blade of the saber. After unsheathing the saber, Chen Ping'an first lightly dipped the shiny black dragon-slaying platform in the creek. He then squatted down by the creek and started to slowly sharpen the saber. His actions were smooth and relaxed, and it was as if he were handling the most delicate and fragile tribute porcelain from his hometown. Chen Ping'an enjoyed focusing his mind on one thing. This was especially the case if he could perform the task to a high standard. This would cause the young boy to feel especially happy. This was just like how he would feel extremely tranquil every time he practiced standing meditation on the peak of a lofty mountain, where his field of view would suddenly open up. He would feel refreshed when he finished meditating, yet he would also feel a slight sense of disappointment. He would feel a strong urge to study the remaining stances of the fist technique in great depth. He wanted to learn and master everything in a single go. That way, his punches would be more refined, and they would also be faster and more ferocious. He wanted his punches to exude the mighty and magnificent aura that Aoyang had displayed when he had soared up and flown away from Pillow Relay Station. However, Chen Ping'an would quietly practice walking meditation whenever this feeling arose. He would slowly suppress his restless urge and tell himself not to be hasty. He needed to calm down and relax his mind. If his mind wasn't relaxed and if he simply pursued speed, then it was much more likely that he would make a mistake and waste all of his previous efforts. This was just like the art of forming and firing pottery. Even so, there were still the occasional moments when Chen Ping'an couldn't calm himself down even when he practiced walking meditation. One of these times, Chen Ping'an had decided to study the maps of the states and prefectures. He had inadvertently discovered 3 carefully stowed away prescriptions, and these were the ones that Taoist Lu had personally written for him. Ning Yao had commented that the characters were written in a bland and flavorless way, just like the boring guanjeti of the scholars. However, Chen Ping'an now had a habit of reading over these 3 prescriptions whether he was busy or not. Doing so would allow him to calm down a little. Li Baoping washed her face. leaving strands of hair sticking to her forehead. After journeying for so long, the little girl had already become a lot more tan than before. Thus, the areas of her forehead that weren't covered by her hair at this moment appeared especially pale and smooth in comparison. The little girl liked to watch her junior uncle as he fully absorbed himself in sharpening the blade. As the blade of the narrow saber moved back and forth against the dragon-slaying platform, it was as if her junior uncle were the only person remaining in the world. She would never get bored of watching him. Of course, she also liked it when Chen Ping'an practiced his fist technique as he walked, when he shielded her behind him and used his fists to reason with others, when he studiously learned characters from them, and so on and so forth. The only difference was whether she liked it, really liked it, super duper liked it, or liked it the most. There were naturally things that she didn't like as well. However, Li Baoping would often forget these things very quickly. The little girl suddenly became a little gloomy when she recalled the letter that she had sent home from Pillow Relay Station in Red Candle Town. Chen Ping'an noticed her sudden change in mood, and he asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Something weighing on your mind?" Li Baoping sighed and replied, "I'm worried about what's going on at home. Second brother is so bad, so will big brother be bullied by him in the future? In terms of this matter, you'll definitely come face to face with your second brother and ask him about Zhu Lu's assassination attempt on me in the future," Chen Ping'an replied with a serious expression. "However, your second brother most likely still cares about you. How could Zhu Lu do that? How could she?" Li Baoping exclaimed with a wry expression. "She's already a martial artist, and her father Zhu, he is also a capable person. If they joined the army, who wouldn't be fighting over them? Would it be difficult for her to win an honorary title in the future? Why did she blindly follow my second brother's instructions?" Chen Ping'an shook his head and said, "I have no answer to these questions either." Nearby, Lin Shui had a grim expression as he remarked, "For profit and self-interest do people come and go?" Li Huai humphed and retorted, "Crock of shit. If you ask me, I'd say that the idiot Zhu Lu has fallen for Baoping's second brother." With her heart fluttering and with love hearts in her eyes, receiving a promise from her crush might be even more alluring than receiving an honorary title. "If that's the case, then she's truly as stupid as she is evil," Lin Shui sneered. "She's beyond saving." Chen Ping'an sighed and glanced at the three children nearby, thinking back to his days in Clay Vase Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley, where commotion, petty arguments, barbed arguments between women, bad-mouthing, and all sorts of things would happen. Chen Ping'an couldn't help but say, "You three are scholars who understand a lot, and on top of that, you're also Mr. Chi's personal disciples. You three are very different from people like me. Even though there were many elderly people where I lived, they were almost no different from the county magistrate and old man we encountered on the ship before. They're unwilling to speak reason, or they're only willing to speak their own reason." Chen Ping'an decided to stop sharpening the narrow saber, and he placed it back in its scabbard. His voice was filled with emotion as he continued, "However, even though these people are unreasonable, some of them are extremely strong and capable of earning enough money to raise their family simply by firing pottery or making charcoal. Some of them are exceptional at growing crops, so their lives are fairly satisfactory as well. Then there are also people who work as midwives but like to boil charmed water and do all kinds of strange things like Granny Ma. She's a very bad person. Yet she's extremely good to her grandson Ma Kuxuan. She'd love to give everything good in the world to her grandson." Chen Ping'an smiled and concluded, "So I want to read some books to understand the reason behind these things." Li Baoping suddenly stood up and started to slowly pace beside the creek. There was a serious expression on her face. In the end, the little girl wearing the red jacket suddenly said, "Junior uncle, I've been thinking about the question you asked on the ship this entire time, and I feel like I've made a little headway now. Do you want to hear about it?" Chen Ping'an suppressed a chuckle and replied, "I just learned the phrase wash my ears and listen respectfully from you guys, and it seems like now is just the right time to use it." Li Baoping puffed her cheeks in anger, and in the end she exclaimed in slight annoyance, "Junior uncle." Chen Ping'an hurriedly smiled and said, "Yes, please continue." Before explaining anything, the little girl made sure to leave herself a path of retreat first, saying, "My explanations might be a little messy, so if Junior Uncle thinks I've said anything wrong, then just keep listening and don't worry about it. You're not allowed to laugh at me." Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, "I was able to reason with someone much older than me on the ship, so why can't you? Don't worry about it and just focus on explaining. Junior uncle is listening attentively. Li Huai pursed his lips and randomly swung his painted puppet through the air. It was as if he were commanding an army of thousands of soldiers and cavalry. Yes, go on, explain. Speaking and arguing with others never hurts. Only fighting with others hurts. Much like a scholar outlining the main topics of their lecture, Li Baoping introduced the 3 areas that she was going to focus on first. I'm going to talk about virtue and morality, local customs and rules, and the laws of empires. Li Huai immediately felt a headache forming. He turned his attention to the exquisite wooden puppet in his hands, and he dreamed about the day that it might suddenly come to life and alleviate his boredom. Lin Shuyi smiled and rested his cheek on one hand. He looked at Li Baoping, who was standing by the creek. Only Chen Ping'an pricked his ears up and listened attentively. When he was little, he would often squat by the wall of the private school to eavesdrop on Mr. Qi's lessons. This was a memory that the young boy in straw sandals cherished. These notions relate to virtuous people, commoners, and evildoers who perform illegal acts. After reading many books, virtuous people will understand more theories and principles. However, we need to keep one thing in mind. Just like Big Brother said, morality is a concept that's far too lofty and intangible. At the end of the day, this concept isn't something that can discipline others. Instead, this concept can only be used to discipline oneself. A person needs to have a righteous mind if they want to establish themselves. With a righteous character, they can gain a righteous reputation. With a righteous reputation, their words can carry truthful reason. With truthful reason, they will accomplish what they seek. In addition, if one wants to bring virtue to the world and educate the masses after cultivating their own character to a state of high virtue, then one can choose to spread their knowledge and virtuous principle just like our teacher did when he taught us in the private school. Ordinary people only need to abide by the rules of their local region. Meanwhile, the laws of empires are explicitly targeting those who flout rules and break regulations. These laws are a string of criteria used to constrain evildoers. These are the lowest level criteria, and they also correspond to the lowest level rules in our Confucian etiquette. Even though Chen Ping'an was listening attentively, he was unable to understand and absorb the principles behind these words, even though he understood every single word. No wonder Aoyang had told him to read more. Lin Shuyi had already shifted to sitting in an upright manner at some unknown time, and he interjected with a frown, "It's the legalist for etiquette." Facing the 3 others, Li Baoping firmly proclaimed, "Legalism is unquestionably derived from Confucianism." Lin Shuyi was stunned. Li Baoping was peeved upon seeing the distracted Li Huai, and she quietly shouted, "Li Huai!" It was as if Li Huai had returned to the days in the private school, where his name would often be gently called out by Mr. Qi. "Here!" he instinctively exclaimed. However, he quickly discovered that it was no longer Mr. Qi calling him, but instead Li Baoping, the little girl who always hit him. Li Huai huffed in anger, and he felt like his response had been quite embarrassing. He lowered his head and continued to play with his puppet. Li Baoping ignored him and she continued, "Each entity has its own rules, and if they can coexist without friction, then society will be harmonious and the world will be peaceful. Emperors and rulers will be able to maintain order with minimal effort. And thus, sages will cease to exist, and great evildoers will be no more." 5. The saying, "As long as sages remain, so too will great evildoers," is a concept raised by Taoists, isn't it? Lin Shuyi interjected again. There was a brilliant glow in Li Baoping's eyes and she loudly countered, "If one principle can be grasped, then all principles can be grasped. The fundamental principles of the world are undoubtedly unanimous." As if remembering something, she slowly paced in front of her 3 companions and continued, "During my final lesson in the private school, Mr. Qi started explaining the concept of right and proper to me when there were only the 2 of us. The foundation of Confucianism lies in the moral regulations expounded in the classical texts." Li Huai finally opened his mouth to speak, saying, "Mr. Qi never talked to me about this. What about you, Lin Shuyi?" Lin Shuyi shook his head. Li Baoping crossed her arms and fumed, "One of you didn't like listening to Mr. Qi's lessons, and one of you never asked questions after hearing Mr. Qi's explanations. What, did you want Mr. Qi to stuff his knowledge into your brains? If it's possible, then I wouldn't be against it at all." Li Huai said with a cheeky grin. Mr. Qi was so knowledgeable, so just a small bit of his knowledge would have been enough to last me an entire lifetime. Having it stuffed into my brain would have saved both time and effort. In fact, it would even prevent me from going down the wrong paths. If one principle can be grasped, then all principles can be grasped. If this is true, then one indeed needs to seek the one principle that acts as the key to understanding all principles. This also aligns with Aoyang's remark of choosing a path that is focused and profound, not paths that are broad and shallow, Lin Shuyi murmured to himself. After being interrupted by Li Huai, it was as if Li Baoping suddenly thought of something else. However, this caused her to hit another bottleneck. The little girl was slightly embarrassed and she said to Chen Ping'an, "Junior uncle, let me think for a while longer. Another question has jumped out to trouble me." Chen Ping'an smiled faintly and gave her a thumbs up. "My explanation wasn't bad?" Li Baoping asked in delight. Chen Ping'an didn't retract his thumb, and he loudly announced, "It was brilliant." However, the four children were completely unaware that the Yin god who was guarding them from a distance was violently convulsing like a pitiful person who had just crawled out from a pot of boiling oil. However, disaster and fortune often came hand in hand. The Yin god was only casually listening to the little girl's childish lecture in the beginning. However, a string of inconceivable situations then arose. His mind shuddered, his soul left his body, and it was as if his Densine energy that was directly proportional to his cultivation base was being sliced apart by gusts of powerful and blade-like wind. The Yin god refused to accept this situation at the start, and he wasn't willing to take a single backward step. However, he was eventually unable to withstand it, and he was forced to retreat time and time again. In fact, he retreated an astonishing several dozen kilometers before he finally felt slightly better. Unwilling to yield, the Yin god braved the formless gusts of righteous wind and forged his way forward one step at a time. He was like a small boat fighting against the current of a tumultuous river. It was said that 9 large continents existed in this world. There were 72 Confucian academies, and a wisp of righteous aura in the minds of the virtuous Confucian disciples would give rise to blissful winds that swept hundreds of kilometers through heaven and earth. 6. At the same time, in an extravagant residence that sat 50 kilometers away in the desolate mountain range, a slender yet extremely pale woman in red attempted to light a white paper lantern and hang it up. However, the lantern would quickly extinguish each time she lit it up. This caused her face to contort slightly in anger. The residence that was as magnificent as the mansions of princes was brimming with ghosts and spirits. Winds of Yin energy rushed through the halls and corridors. The woman tossed the white lantern away and slowly rose into the air. In the end, she hovered to a stop at a point higher than the roof before sweeping her gaze over the surroundings. Chen Ping'an and the others had entered the mountain range from the north and were now heading toward the south. After traveling for a while, they coincidentally came across another group of people who were heading toward the north. Their leader was an old Taoist priest who had a peachwood sword on his back and a string of silver bells hanging from his waist. His Taoist robes were aged, and there was nothing but straw sandals on his feet. He had barely any immortal aura, but he was indeed brimming with an aura of poverty. There was a lame and awkward-looking young boy behind the old Taoist priest, and apart from carrying a large bag on his back, there was also a banner that read, "Subduing demons and capturing ghosts, eliminating fiends and safeguarding Tao," resting diagonally across his shoulder. However, the fabric had already started to wear and lose its color, and this was perhaps because the banner had been washed too many times. The characters on it were also fading. Apart from him, there was also a little girl with a round face who looked to be around 7 or 8 years old. She was small and skinny, and she was using her arms to support the old Taoist priest whose eyes remained shut for some reason. The old Taoist priest suddenly looked up and gazed at the winding azure and black mountain range in front of him. There was astonishment in his voice as he exclaimed, "Huh? These mountains aren't very far away from the river god shrine of the embroidered flower river. Yet there's actually such obvious demonic energy soaring into the sky? There's definitely some hidden secret behind all this. Even though boundaries exist between mountains and waters, with neither interfering with the other, this place is indeed very strange. Extremely strange." When the little girl with rosy cheeks heard this, she asked anxiously, "Master, then what should we do? You failed to capture the demons in Three Twigs Mountain last time. And the people who hired us were so angry that they ultimately didn't pay us anything. We're genuinely running out of copper coins now, so why don't we take a detour instead? Take a detour? The old Taoist priest humphed coldly. If I didn't encounter these demons, then so be it. I can simply view that as the luck of these demons. However, since this Taoist priest has come across them, is there any reason for me to spare them? Are the characters written on the banner, eliminating fiends and safeguarding Tao, merely a show to outsiders? Master, there aren't any outsiders here. The little girl reminded him with a sigh. The old Taoist priest produced a forced smile and said, "Oh, it was just an offhand remark. I still haven't recovered from our experience in Three Twigs Mountain. That was truly far too infuriating. Even if the outcome wasn't ideal, we should have still received some credit for our hard work." Yet, they were unwilling to pay even half a copper coin. There are actually such shameless and uncharitable people in the world. It serves them right that their ancestral graves have been taken over by mountain ghosts, and that their children and descendants will face calamity after calamity. Master, don't you often say that Taoists need to have a balanced mind? The little girl reminded him again. The old Taoist priest had still been smiling and benevolent a moment ago, yet he suddenly flared up in rage at this moment. He reached over to forcefully pinch the elbow of the little girl with 2 fingers, and he scolded with a stern expression. "Who's given you the courage to educate your master? And you even dare to do so time and time again." The little girl's elbow hurt so much that she immediately burst into tears. She hurriedly begged for forgiveness, saying, "Ow, ow, ow, it hurts. Master, I won't dare to do it again." The old Taoist priest didn't turn around, and he simply reached down to forcefully smack the string of bells hanging by his waist. As the bells chimed, he spat with a frightening smile. "Little bastard, you dare to develop killing intent toward your master?" The lame young boy remained silent. However, blood quickly started to trickle from his nose and ears. Even so, the young boy still remained silent and unmoving. The little girl sobbed even more sadly and she begged, "Master, please spare senior brother. He definitely didn't do it on purpose. I promise that I'll try my best to give Master an extra 500 grams of spring water within the next 3 days." A smile spread across the old Taoist priest's face, and he forcefully patted the little girl's head. The skinny little girl swayed left and right, and she immediately added, "Not try my best, but guarantee." The old Taoist priest finally retracted his hand, which was as shriveled as an old branch. He laughed heartily and announced, "Let's enter the mountains. Horses won't grow fat without wild grass. Perhaps there's a mountain of wealth waiting for us here. Indeed, even though you 2 bastards are sponging food and drinks off me, your master's mind has truly become more at ease when he cultivates. Now that I think about it, I should probably treat the 2 of you a little bit better in the future." Haha. The little girl continued to support the blind Taoist priest with her arms as they started to climb the mountain. The lame young boy quietly wiped the blood from his face. He was already used to this. The little girl secretly turned around to smile at him, and the lame young boy grinned in reply, signaling that he was okay. After entering the mountains, the master and 2 disciples were surprisingly unable to pinpoint the source of the demonic energy, even after traveling around for more than 5 days. The old Taoist priest could still sense the wisps of demonic energy suffusing through the nearby trees and vegetation, yet he couldn't locate the origin of this energy no matter what. Because of this, the old Taoist priest was aware that this demon was definitely very powerful. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to deploy this concealment formation. However, the old Taoist priest was still unwilling to give up. He ordered the lame boy carrying the banner to scout the surroundings every day, while he and the round-faced little girl would take a rest in someplace near the mountain pass. From time to time, he would take out a wooden geomantic compass, which people often referred to as inverting compasses. This was a tool commonly used by Taoist priests and naturalists. Such compasses weren't rare. Yet the flash of gold that would occasionally flow through the red needle revealed that this compass held more secrets than met the eye. The sky was dark and mist hung in the air. It could rain at any moment. The old Taoist priest was squatting by the path at this moment, and as he gazed down at the geomantic compass, he recited in a mystical voice, upside down, the 24 mountains contain mountains of gold and mountains of silver. Upside down, the 24 mountains contain the lair of dragons and the dens of tigers. The The old man put his geomantic compass away and turned around to face the mountains in the distance. He chuckled softly and said, "The path toward wealth has opened up. The heavens will always leave us a way out. By the looks of it, I'll be able to enjoy a few cups of wine when we arrive at Wanping County." The round-faced little girl followed her master's gaze, only to see a group of people slowly walking over. She opened her eyes as wide as she could. As the group of people drew closer, she discovered that the person walking in front was a young boy in straw sandals carrying a large basket on his back. There was a machete in his hand, and he would occasionally use it to clear the branches and shrubs blocking the narrow path, lest they catch and tear their clothes. There were 3 people behind him, and they were all quite young. One was a little sister wearing a bright red jacket, one was a mischievous-looking little boy, and one was an aloof-looking older brother. The 3 of them were all carrying small and adorable green bookcases. Finally, there was a white donkey carrying luggage following behind them. The little girl lowered her voice and said, "Master, they don't look like wealthy people. How about we give it a pass?" The blind Taoist priest raised an eyebrow and retorted, "As small as a mosquito's leg may be, it's still meat after all. You're somewhat managing our resources as well. So are you not aware of how many copper coins remain in our pockets? With how voracious your senior brother is, just how many taels of silver has he already eaten away? If it weren't for me taking pity on you too, just how many days would you have lasted in this cruel world?" The intelligent little girl hurriedly started to massage the old Taoist priest's shoulders. There was a sincere smile on her face as she said in gratitude, "That's why older brother and I never complain even if we have to do hard work for master. However, if master becomes angry in the future, can you punish me when older brother isn't present instead? That way, older brother won't get angry, and master won't need to punish him either." The old Taoist priest slowly stood up. The little girl immediately retracted her hands and stood to the side. The group of people approaching them was none other than Chan Ping'an and the others, who were heading toward Yefu Pass, which was located on the border of the Great Li Empire. In fact, Chan Ping'an had already noticed the smiling old man and the demure little girl a long time ago. When Chan Ping'an and the others drew closer, the old Taoist priest stroked his beard and smiled before saying in a slightly awkward-sounding official dialect, "If my observations aren't wrong, then the 4 of you have faced perilous dangers during your long journey. However, it's imperative that you don't blindly believe the notion that you'll encounter fortune after surviving great calamity. From my observations, the true calamity still lies ahead. Only after overcoming this obstacle will you be able to encounter fortune." Chan Ping'an's mind immediately became alert. However, his expression remained unchanging. Meanwhile, Li Baoping observed the slightly pale little girl. The little girl smiled shyly, and Li Baoping also smiled in reply. The little girl wearing the red jacket and the even littler little girl immediately developed good impressions of each other. Li Huai almost uttered the words that were already on the tip of his tongue. "Aren't you blind, old Taoist priest? How can you be observing this and observing that?" However, the troubles that they had encountered while traveling down the embroidered flower river were still fresh in the little boy's mind. He immediately held his mouth shut with his hands, determined to stop himself from causing any more trouble. As if sensing Li Huai's thoughts, the blind Taoist priest laughed loudly and explained, "You children don't know, but the Taoist sect has 10 great mystical abilities. Among them there's the ability opening the eye of the mind, bringing clarity to heaven and earth, repelling ghosts and demons. I've coincidentally learned this ability, and even though I don't dare to claim that I'm a master, I do indeed have a fairly good grasp of it already. I don't observe others through their physical appearance, and I instead only need to observe them through their aura." The Confucian sages teach us not to speak of peculiar powers, unfathomable strength, chaotic rebellions, and ghosts and gods when meeting others in chance encounters, Lin Shui said with a calm expression. The old Taoist priest was slightly astonished. However, he quickly sighed and said, "So be it, so be it. Buddhist monks don't enlighten those who aren't fated, and Taoist priests don't save those who are misguided. You can go now. However, I hope that you'll be careful for the rest of your journey. If you genuinely come across any troubles, then don't be afraid to yell loudly. If I coincidentally hear your shouts for help, then I'll definitely rush over to provide you with assistance. If I'm too far away, however, then I'll be powerless even if I want to help." After saying this, the blind old Taoist priest stepped aside to give them the path. Chen Ping'an smiled and said, "Thank you for the warning, we will be careful." The two groups walked past each other, and Li Baoping confidently waved at the skinny and round-faced little girl. The little girl timidly raised her hand to her chest and lightly waved back, silently bidding farewell. When Chen Ping'an and the others vanished into the distance, the old Taoist priest mumbled, "During our journey, we've either come across unrefined martial artists from the Great Li Empire or unknowledgeable locals from the nearby towns. This technique worked every time, so why has it suddenly stopped working today? Such misfortune. Nothing's working out. By the looks of it, it's even more important that we don't fail to conquer the demon this time. Great demons living in the mountains definitely possess grand wealth, so this time." The blind Taoist priest's eyelids shuddered a little, and he immediately stopped speaking. He patted the head of the little girl who was gazing at the distant mountain path with a reluctant expression, and he said in an amiable voice, "Zhuhou, your master's lightning cultivation will receive assurance if we succeed this time. When that happens, we won't need to worry about money anymore. That being the case, I'll definitely be nicer to you and your older brother in the future." The little girl looked up and said with a smile, "I'll be very happy as long as master stops hitting the bells all the time." The blind Taoist priest didn't comment on this. He suddenly looked up, with his fingers also starting to form seals. He wasn't astonished, and he was instead delighted as he exclaimed, "The atmosphere had changed. Such dense demonic energy. It's actually able to bring change to the surrounding climate as well. Very good, very good. We've finally managed to lure the snake from its lair. Little Zhuhou, get ready to eliminate fiends and safeguard Dao with me." The little girl nodded in earnest. She was completely unafraid of the demons and ghosts that were able to terrify the common people with just their reputation alone. She retrieved a small silver blade that was only an inch long before rolling up her sleeves. As she prepared to draw the blade across her arm, she asked, "Master, do you need the talisman spring water now?" The old Taoist priest nodded and replied, "Even though I still have some, it's safer if I collect a bit more to prepare for any unexpected situations. That way, I won't be caught by surprise by the demons, and you too won't end up suffering any misfortunes as a result either." The little girl took a deep breath before using the small blade to cut a gash in her arm. Warm blood instantly spilled out, and she hurriedly raised her arm and said, "Master, it's ready." The blind Taoist priest deftly used his finger to rapidly draw a seal on his left palm. He then swapped hands and drew another seal on his right palm. The little girl grew increasingly pale, yet she still asked in earnest, "Master, is that enough?" "It's enough for the moment," the old Taoist priest chuckled in reply. "I'll give the great demon in this mountain a taste of my lightning spell now. Let's see how it likes lightning crashing down on its head." Approximately 500 meters away from the master and disciple, Chen Ping'an suddenly stopped in his tracks and raised his machete, signaling for the others to be on guard. The others looked over, only to see a young boy leaping out from the dense forest like an agile monkey. There was a strange banner in his hands, and he vigorously waved it several times as he stood on the mountain path with his back facing them. After doing this, he was just about to run down the mountain path to return to where the old Taoist priest was. However, he saw Chen Ping'an and the others when he turned around, and a slightly worried expression spread across his face. After thinking for a brief moment, the young boy who was drenched in sweat gritted his teeth and changed his plans. He continued to retreat down the mountain, but he chose to take a detour instead of running down the mountain path. At the same time, he didn't forget to gesture to Chen Ping'an and the others, warning them to leave quickly. Li Huai was astonished. "What's going on?" Lin Shui frowned and replied, "That young boy is most likely being pursued by a sinister entity. I can sense some permeating yin energy." Sure enough, a fuzzy figure that was enveloped in tumultuous black smoke paused for a moment when it saw Chen Ping'an and the others. An eerie and terrifying aura emanated from it, yet it eventually decided to ignore them and pursue the young boy holding the banner instead. It rapidly dashed after him. Chen Ping'an turned to Lin Shui and said, "Ask Senior Yin God what he thinks about this." After a moment, Lin Shui replied, "Senior Yin God told us to keep walking forward and not to stop here. He said that he'll observe the situation if he has the chance. However, He also said that his job is only to guard us and accompany us to the border of the Great Li Empire. He wants to remind us that our goal is to journey to a distant land to seek knowledge, not to act as benevolent people who subdue demons and slay fiends. He hopes that we can refrain from seeking trouble for ourselves. Chen Ping'an nodded and said, "Tell Signorine God to act according to the situation. He can help if he's able to, but there's no need for him to force himself if the situation is too difficult. Also, you should prepare 3 talismans as well, Lin Shui. You walk in front from now on and I'll bring up the rear. Baoping and Li Huai, remember not to be afraid if we truly come across any ghosts or demons. Make sure not to act like, forget about it, let's continue forward." Chen Ping'an had initially wanted to tell them not to act like Zhu Lu had in Go Table Mountain. She had clearly been at the peak stage of the 2nd tier, yet she hadn't dared to lift even a single finger against the ferocious white python. However, he quickly swallowed his words after recalling the comment that Aoyang had casually made. Those who talk behind others' backs are definitely troublemakers themselves. Lin Shui remained calm and unfazed. Right now, he could just manage to use the 3 lowest quality yellow paper talismans from the stack of paper talismans that the Li clan from the small town had treasured. One was pearl within a plate, and this was a water element talisman. One was fiery rain, and this was a fire element talisman. The last one was 5 mountains shatter the barrier, and this was a mountain aura talisman. However, what Lin Shui truly depended on wasn't these 3 paper talismans, which he still didn't know the power of. Instead, it was himself. It was the secret lightning technique recorded in the Recite Atop Cloud scripture. However, Lin Shui naturally wouldn't seek trouble and put everyone in danger for the sake of testing the might of his lightning technique. The 4 of them walked quickly. Li Huai put his hand out as he walked, and he grumbled in bewilderment. "It's starting to rain just like this? You're not going to give us any warning beforehand." The sky was overcast, and rain continued to fall. The rain wasn't heavy, yet it caused the mountain to become far chillier than before. Chen Ping'an retrieved 4 bamboo hats from his basket. They had purchased these in Red Candle Town, and they were for the exact scenario of continuing to journey through the wind and rain. They each wore a bamboo hat, and they didn't stop to wait for the rain to clear. Chen Ping'an occasionally turned around to glance back. In the distance, the blind Taoist priest laughed loudly as he faced the direction that the limp young boy was wildly sprinting over from. "Very well, I've been waiting for you to arrive, you measly fiend. You're seeking death. Now die." The old Taoist priest took a firm step forward as he unleashed a palm strike. Only afterward did he shout a warning to the limp young boy. "Get down!" The young boy leaped forward and rolled along the muddy mountain path. Golden light dazzled in the old Taoist priest's palms, and each stroke of the cymbals radiated with a brilliant golden glow. There was a faint rumble of thunder in his palms. Contrasted against the dark and rainy atmosphere of the desolate mountain, these streaks of golden light appeared especially piercing and eye-catching. The ball of black smoke behind the young boy ground to a sudden halt. It was just about to flee, yet it had already been struck by a beam of golden light. It was as if it had been enveloped by a large golden net. There was a crackling and hissing sound, and the dark shadow wailed in anguish as it quickly vanished into nothingness. The young boy ran behind the old Taoist priest with his back still bent. He was panting heavily, and he planted the soul-summoning banner into the ground. Upon seeing the little girl's worried expression, he grinned and shook his head to signify that he was fine. After vanquishing the fiend with a single palm strike, the old Taoist priest laughed heartily and exclaimed, "You were nothing but a lowly entity born from withered bones, yet you still dared to show yourself in front of me?" A wisp of gray was seemingly dragged inside the planted banner. The old Taoist priest leaped up before twisting around in midair and throwing another palm strike. "Come on over, all of you, come on over. You can all transform into my boundless merit and virtue." Another entity creeping up behind the young boy and little girl was blasted into smithereens by the old Taoist priest's lightning technique. It wasn't long before another wisp of gray flew into the banner. The old Taoist priest dashed and leaped across the mountain path as he rapidly unleashed palm strike after palm strike. Beams of golden light flashed again and again, accompanied by the astonishing sound of rumbling thunder. He laughed heartily, and his aura appeared imposing as his aged face was illuminated by the arcs of lighting flashing amid the dreary rain. He was indeed capable of slaying demons and vanquishing fiends. Just how vast and magnificent is my lightning technique? Is it something that measly entities like you can rival? The great demon cowering behind the scenes, are you going to send more small fry to their deaths? I urge you to hurry up and surrender. Hand over half of your wealth, and perhaps I'll be benevolent enough to spare your life. For the past 1,000 years, lightning techniques had remained dominant as the most lofty of the myriad techniques of the Taoist sect. Once they were unleashed, they were widely recognized as the mightiest and most peerless of techniques. However, when it came to the 5 lightning righteous technique, few Taoist sects in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent were able to truly comprehend its essence. Most of the techniques being taught were either incomplete or variations that only emulated its form but not its essence. As a result, those who wielded these latter techniques would definitely suffer a backlash. As time went on, their vitality would slowly be exhausted, leading them to an early death. In other words, the old Taoist priest's blindness wasn't necessarily due to natural causes. The balls of black smoke that had been rapidly fluttering around the forest surrounding the mountain path gradually reduced in number. At the same time, the revolting sounds that were a mixture of their whimpering, wailing, and roaring also subsided into silence. "Master, a lot of lanterns have been hung up behind us," the little girl said quietly. The blind Taoist priest turned around to look over. He could sense numerous white paper lanterns materializing in the air and being mysteriously lit up. It was as if a fiery dragon that measured hundreds upon thousands of meters long was slowly swimming through the mountains and marshes. His expression became serious, and he rubbed his palms together. The symbols that he had drawn with his disciples' blood were already nearing their limit. The old Taoist priest drew the peachwood sword from his back, and it was as if he were facing a formidable enemy. A woman dressed in a bright red wedding dress walked over in a calm and casual manner. There was an oil paper umbrella in her hand, and her eerie voice sounded next to their ears even though her mouth clearly wasn't moving. "Taoist priest, please continue to draw your symbols and talismans. I can wait for you even if you want to cover your entire body in them. After this, I'll invite you 3 to my residence where I'll personally wash your faces, pull out your tendons, and pierce your hearts." It appeared as if the female ghost in red was most interested in the round-faced little girl. Her hoarse voice continued to ring next to their ears as she reached up to cup her small and snow-white face. "For example, washing faces is like this." In the next moment, the round-faced little girl hurriedly shut her eyes in fright. As it turned out, the female ghost had lightly wiped her hands across her face and washed her skin away, revealing a bloody and harrowing appearance. The blind Taoist priest pointed the tip of his peachwood sword at the female ghost in the red wedding dress, and he asked, "Are you a demon or a ghost?" The female ghost lightly twirled the oil paper umbrella in her hand, and standing alone on the mountain path in the distance, she appeared quite lonely and without any support. After making her way over, her red wedding dress was now already covered in mud. For some unknown reason, she hadn't used her mystical powers to form a dress that could repel dirt and water with the formless miasma in the mountains. It was clear that her bright red wedding dress was made from real silk, and perhaps it had even been made by the dressmakers near this mountain range. Just then, the female ghost had ripped the skin off her face by swiping her hand down. At this moment, she slowly moved her hand up to once again plaster the skin back on her face, giving her a pale and colorless look. She looked much like a beautiful young woman who belonged in her room awaiting marriage. If it weren't for her sickly complexion, she would actually appear no different from ordinary young women. She was extremely close to the master and his 2 disciples now, yet even the blind old Taoist priest couldn't sense any demonic energy radiating from her. In fact, these great demons who possessed high cultivation bases could already wander around human cities without any issues. As long as they didn't purposely approach the city god pavilions or the Wenchong pavilions and martial sage temples, they wouldn't be targeted and suppressed by the forces in these mortal cities. Of course, this was under the prerequisite that they were willing to conceal their demonic aura and suppress their innate desire to kill and cause catastrophes. The corners of the female ghost's mouth moved slightly. Even though her lips remained unmoving, a voice sounded next to their ears once again. "Taoist priest, you desire to vanquish demons and fiends to accumulate boundless merit and virtue. and so I came over here to meet with you. I eagerly await your so-called 5 lightning righteous technique." The old Taoist priest was feeling increasingly astonished. The layers of the inverting compass in his sleeve wildly fluctuated back and forth. This was a compass that had 4 internal and external layers in total, corresponding to demons, spirits, entities and ghosts, and mountain gods and river gods. Apart from the layer that corresponded to spirits, the 3 other layers of the inverting compass were all spinning and shaking violently. This signified that the female ghost before them had an extremely complicated background. When she was still alive, it was extremely likely that she had been a great demon with a powerful cultivation base. After dying, she had transformed into a powerful ghost that was able to rule over a region. However, before comprehensively falling to evil, she had already gained the right to be promoted to a mountain goddess or river goddess. The blind Taoist priest grumbled in grief in his mind. Compared to the tricky and scheming mountain ghost in Three Twigs Mountain, was this female ghost any weaker? In fact, were they even on the same level? The old Taoist priest did his best to maintain his expression and calm down his heartbeat, lest the female ghost pick up on his nervousness. He slowly lowered his peachwood sword and changed to holding it backward, signaling that he meant no harm. With a generous smile, he said loudly, "Young miss, even though your demonic aura is vast, giving you the ability to rule over an entire region, it's a rare pleasure indeed that my observations using my heart's eyes show me that there's little killing intent radiating from your body. You've committed few sins, and even the wisps of resentment circling around you are remnants from many years ago and barely worth a mention. As an itinerant cultivator, I can almost be regarded as a cultivator in the same vein as you, young Mississippi. Yet, I've accidentally intruded on your territory and disturbed your cultivation. My apologies, my apologies." The female ghost, who had been gazing up at her oil paper umbrella the entire time, suddenly retracted her gaze and glowered at the traveling Taoist priest, who was skilled in wielding lightning techniques. She finally opened her mouth to speak this time, saying, "Young miss, can't you see my wedding dress? Call me lady." The female ghost wearing the bright red wedding dress was essentially roaring when she spoke the last 3 words. The next instant, heavy rain crashed down and wild winds swept through the mountains. There was a snap as the female ghost closed her oil paper umbrella. She held the umbrella with one hand and lightly stroked it with the other, gently removing the rainwater from its surface. However, her face continued to contort as she looked at the faces of the Taoist priest and his 2 disciples. As expected of a blind person, an old and blind person, you can observe a person using your heart's eye, huh? Then let me bring you back to my residence. I'll have you ill-intentioned and bull-nosed. Old Taoist priest understand what heart-wrenching pain is. The old Taoist priest attempted to lighten the mood, sighing and saying, "Milady, is there any need to take things so far? Is there no room to maneuver or relent?" The female ghost started to slowly walk forward. She walked along the muddy path one step at a time, with one hand holding her oil paper umbrella and one hand holding up her dress, revealing her soaked and soiled embroidered shoes. With a faint smile on her face, she replied, "Your Taoist cultivation is shallow, yet you still dare to face me with ill intentions. Yes, it's best that you die. Death will definitely be your best option. That way, you won't delay my husband's studies and delay him from passing the imperial exam." In the end, the female ghost's voice became nothing more than a soft murmur, with a gentle look also appearing in her eyes. However, her words, which were like whispers to herself, were completely drowned out by that lashing wind and pouring rain. "Milady, do you truly insist on fighting to the death with me?" the blind Taoist priest asked with a cold chuckle. The old Taoist priest had traveled to many places in the past few dozen years, and he had already wandered around almost half of the entire eastern treasured vile continent. He wasn't someone to be afraid of trouble, so upon seeing things reach this irreparable state, he softly shouted, "Little lame lad, as long as we work together and successfully repel the enemy, I promise you that I'll spare little Jor from offering me any talisman spring water for an entire year." The lame young boy nodded in agreement. He reached over to grab the soul-summoning banner that read, "Subduing demons and capturing ghosts, eliminating fiends and safeguarding Tao," and he said in a solemn voice, "I'm ready." The old Taoist priest forcefully stomped the ground before placing his index finger and middle fingers together on both hands, forming Taoist finger swords. He then quickly recited a sword spell, eventually finishing with the phrase, "Urgent matter that needs immediate resolution." The soul-summoning banner planted in the ground suddenly opened up from its initially crumpled state, and it was now billowing freely and flapping in the wind. The characters printed on it became pale white, and it was as if these characters were soldiers suited in silver armor, and standing on the battlefield awaiting orders from their general. They started to run across the banner and enter formation. The characters subduing demons and capturing ghosts flowed through the banner and entered the wooden pole, eventually traveling through the lame young boy's arms and shoulders and rapidly coursing through his body. In the end, these characters entered the young boy's ears and nose. His eyes instantly became pure white, and each time he inhaled and exhaled, black smoke would float around his face and orifices. The lame young boy clenched his hands into fists before tilting his head and unleashing a furious roar at the sky. His body became wreathed in black smoke, and the pea-sized raindrops surprisingly evaporated when they arrived within 1 meter of his head. Compared to the female ghost who was concealing her Yin energy, the lame young boy appeared even more like a Yin entity or ghost who would devour innocent mortal humans. The female ghost had been observing the round-faced little girl the entire time, and only when the lame young boy started to furiously charge at her did she finally turn to look at the relieved old Taoist priest. "Such a massive disappointment," she said calmly. "In fact, this can't even be regarded as a heretical path. Instead, it can only be categorized as a pathetic and crooked path. Sinners who accuse others of wrongdoing shouldn't be granted death. Instead, they should be granted life that's even more torturous than death." The lame young boy arrived before the female ghost in a flash, and he leaped high into the air before throwing a kick at her head. The female ghost didn't dodge, nor did she try to block his attack. One of her hands remained holding up her dress with 2 fingers the entire time, and her figure was graceful as she directly walked forward. There was a loud thump. The female ghost's head was dragged out with its roots and sent flying to someplace down the mountain. However, the headless female ghost continued to advance forward. After landing, the lame young boy once again whipped his leg at the headless female ghost, this time striking her waist. Using the back of her hand that was holding the oil paper umbrella, the female ghost lightly blocked the waist-severing kick of the lame young boy that carried immense force. The lame young boy's attack was surprisingly unable to move the female ghost's hand a single inch. However, borrowing the powerful reaction force, the young boy performed a twist in midair before throwing a palm strike at the female ghost's heart. "Subduing demons," he roared in a solemn voice. The silver characters "subduing demons" materialized on the back of the young boy's hand before automatically dismantling themselves one stroke at a time. In the end, these strokes gathered together to transform into a short silver sword that was brimming with killing intent. Enveloped in azure-white light, the short silver sword shot out from his hand and thrust at the female ghost's heart. The female ghost raised her hand and pinched the sharp flying sword that was just about to pierce through her bright red wedding dress with 2 fingers. The flying sword that measured only a foot long rang and shuddered violently. "So be it if I lose my head," the female ghost said unhurriedly. "However, this wedding dress definitely can't be damaged. It can be washed if it becomes dirty, but mending it after it becomes damaged will render it no longer beautiful. Otherwise, why does my husband always tease my needlework?" The lame young boy almost immediately followed his palm strike up with an uppercut. However, he didn't shout the words "capturing ghosts." Even so, a flying sword still formed from the characters on the banner and shot out from his fist. His expression was awkward and stiff, but the lame young boy definitely wasn't a slow-witted fool. Lashing out to kill his enemy, the lame young boy used both open and concealed attacks. A deafening roar suddenly exploded at this moment, bellowing, "Lowly ghost, this Taoist priest is going to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. You might be missing your head, but I'm still going to blast your soul with bolts of furious lightning." A bolt of white lightning crashed down from 30 or so meters above the mountain path. The female ghost didn't let go of her oil paper umbrella. With her other hand, she first pinched the subduing demon's flying sword with her index finger and thumb before raising her hand slightly and catching the capturing ghost's flying sword with her ring finger and pinky. With a graceful thrust, she then slammed her elbow into the lame young boy's head, sending him flying back and crashing into the muddy mountain path. where he slid for another 3 meters before finally coming to a stop. The female ghost raised her oil paper umbrella and opened it with a soft snap. The bolt of white lightning crashed into her umbrella, creating brilliant sparks. Exerting slightly more force with her 4 fingers as she stood under the oil paper umbrella, the female ghost forcefully snapped the 2 flying swords in half. After falling to the ground, the shattered swords transformed into 2 puddles of silver liquid before quickly mixing together with the mud. With a wave of her hand, the female ghost's head flew back and reattached itself to her neck. Her veins and flesh knitted back together, and it wasn't long before she recovered her original appearance. Using her free hand, she removed a few blades of green grass from her hair. Again, the blind old Taoist priest's heart shuddered, and he knew that he would have no chance if he didn't unleash his full power and fight as if his life depended on it. He took a deep breath, and his expression became dignified as a faint yellow glow enveloped his body. He lifted one foot off the ground, and he pulled a fist back and heavily hammered it against his abdomen. Meanwhile, he raised his other palm to the sky, causing his sleeves to slide down and reveal a string of sanguine symbols on his elbow. A breath forms clouds and rain. A smile summons thunder and lightning. Recite atop clouds, immortals point the way. The old Taoist priest recited in a solemn voice. The female ghost pursed her lips. As she walked past the severely wounded young boy with her oil paper umbrella still in hand, she casually raised a foot to kick him aside, annoyed that he was blocking the path. The young boy flew down the mountain, yet he immediately vanished from mid-air. The round-faced little girl went crazy, and she used the small silver blade to cut her palms and arms before chaotically smearing blood all over her face. After doing this, she charged at the female ghost to fight her to the death. However, the little girl forgot that it was pouring rain at this moment. Moreover, she didn't have the immortal power to maintain the spiritual energy of the talismanic symbols like the old Taoist priest. Thus, her face was already washed clean by the time she arrived in front of the female ghost. All that remained was rainwater that continued to slide down her face. Meanwhile, her blood had already been washed away. The female ghost threw a casual slap, striking the little girl's face and immediately sending her soaring through the air. Like the lame young boy, she quickly vanished from mid-air. Afterward, a bolt of white lightning that was as wide as a bucket would crash down at the female ghost for each step that she took. After smashing into her oil paper umbrella, the bolts of white lightning would explode apart and send arcs of electricity crackling into the surroundings. If someone were to gaze at this mountain from a distance right now, they would see arcs of white lightning snaking down from not high up in midair before exploding apart in a brilliant manner in the mountain forest. Initially a light but dreary drizzle that could be navigated with bamboo hats on their head, the rain suddenly transformed into a torrential downpour without any warning. It was extremely difficult to continue forward. When Chen Ping'an suggested that they find a place to shelter from the rain, Lin Shui held his bamboo hat with one hand to prevent the relentless rain from pushing it crooked before saying in a serious voice, "Something's not right." Li Huai grabbed Li Baoping's sleeves and shouted, "I'm a bit scared. Isn't Senior Ying got a ghost as well? What are you afraid of?" Li Baoping said, educating the little boy. "Oh, you're right," Li Huai exclaimed with his eyes lighting up. He then turned around to issue an instruction to the white donkey trailing behind Lin Shui. "Little white donkey, don't get lost." The donkey snorted in reply. The Yin god appeared beside Chen Ping'an, and it told him in a hoarse voice, "There's a female ghost watching over the mountains and rivers of this place. She's exchanging blows with the old Taoist priest right now, and if everything goes as expected, then it's almost certain that she'll achieve victory. Her origin is unclear, but what's clear is the fact that her cultivation base is quite high. If it were during normal times and at another location, then I could indeed capture her with no problem. However, at this time and in this place, it's unlikely that I'll succeed." The Yin god carefully scanned the surroundings before explaining. The formal mountain gods and river gods listed in the mountain and sea genealogical record all have their own mountains and territories or areas of jurisdiction. When they fight with others in their territory, they'll naturally gain a clear advantage due to having the favor of the surrounding heaven and earth. Apart from these areas, there can indeed be powerful demons or fiends in the mountains and rivers not assigned formal gods by the imperial court. However, it will be impossibly difficult for them to create territories that are similar to Confucian schools and academies. Taoist temples and blessed lands, or military and ancient battlefield ruins. These aren't things that can be created with a powerful cultivation base alone. On top of that, one also needs to have immense fated opportunities. However, the heavens have never favored entities like me. So how can it be easy to openly rule over a piece of land akin to how mortal empires rule over provinces and cities? Senior God was definitely a scholar when he was alive. Li Huai murmured to himself in a timid manner. The God's voice became solemn and low, and he pointed at the mountain path underfoot before continuing. I have very bad news for you. The ruling female ghost here is already no inferior to mountain gods. In fact, it's even possible that she's enjoying the power of a river guardian at the same time. Everything about her exudes a sense of strangeness. Also, the path that you're walking was put under a mystical ability by the female ghost from the very beginning. Right now, you're walking on a path to the underworld that she secretly laid. I'm an entity, so I can naturally enter and exit this path as I please. However, it's possible that I might severely wound your physical bodies and souls if I try to forcefully lead you out of this path. Senior God, since you're unable to defeat her, and since we're unable to leave this path, what else can we do? Lin Shui asked in a calm and composed voice. We'll discuss this when she appears. Rest assured, I definitely won't allow her to injure any of you. The God replied in a solemn voice. The God felt slightly guilty and remorseful. He regretted the fact that he had chosen to forge forward against the aura of righteousness just then. Even though this would greatly benefit his cultivation in the future, to an inestimable degree no less, the problem was that it had temporarily reduced his cultivation to just 75% or so of what it had originally been. And now they had also fallen for the female ghost's trap. In fact, it was extremely likely that her target had always been Chan Ping'an and the others to begin with, not the blind old Taoist priest and his 2 disciples. The white paper lanterns that hovered above several kilometers of the mountain path were nothing more than bait to lure them over. The God's expression was complicated. The cultivation base of the blind old Taoist priest wasn't especially high, yet his tongue was truly as barbed as could be. All of you stand behind me, the God said. It wasn't long before the God reached the front of the group. Chan Ping'an and Lin Shui stood directly behind him, with one to the left and one to the right. Chan Ping'an had already swapped his machete out for auspicious talisman, while Lin Shui's hands were resting by his sides, with a paper talisman in each of his sleeves. Li Baoping and Li Huai stood behind them. At the very end of the group was the white donkey, which was stomping the ground in slight irritation and unease, sending mud flying everywhere. A female ghost wearing a red wedding dress and holding an oil paper umbrella slowly walked over from the distance. She was dragging the blind old Taoist priest by the leg using her other hand, and she finally came to a stop when she arrived a dozen or so meters in front of Chan Ping'an and the others. One after another, countless lanterns lit up above the mountain path. This was the same case even behind Chan Ping'an and his companions. Orbs of soft red glow cast a red sheen over everyone's face. The female ghost tossed the old Taoist priest between them, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. There was a look of delighted surprise on her face, and she used her finger to count them before saying, "Oh, so many esteemed guests. 1, 2, 3. There are 3 scholars as well. Which one of you is a virtuous Confucian? My husband once made the resolve to become a virtuous gentleman, so that he could bring peace to the lands and people. You people are so young. Yet you've already managed to achieve my husband's long-cherished ambition." Chan Ping'an wanted to step forward, yet the God shook his head and said in a quiet voice, "There's no rush." The female ghost cocked her head and looked left and right, sizing up the 3 children who were carrying small bamboo bookcases. My husband often said that only those with upstanding character can be genuinely regarded as scholars. Thus, I'll ask my subordinates to invite the passing scholars to my place whenever I yearn for my husband who's yet to return from his distant journey. I'll lavish them with beautiful maidservants, the only existing copies of ancient books, and 1,000-year-old gyukins. I enjoy listening to them make their pledges of undying love, and their artful manner of uttering these proclamations of love are ones that can only be achieved by scholars who have filled themselves with the knowledge of poems and books. After saying this, the female ghost focused her attention on the God and continued with a faint smile. "Senior God, you're truly out of luck this time. If it were a few years ago, then I definitely wouldn't have dared to show myself before you." She lowered her head and laughed softly with her hand covering her mouth. There was affection in her eyes and she murmured to herself, "It's indeed not good for women to show their faces in public." However, her deathly pale face appeared far too creepy under the soft illumination of the lanterns. Li Huai stuck his head out to take a glance, yet he was so terrified that his legs immediately started to shiver. The female ghost smiled and asked, "It's been far too long since I've chatted with anyone, so I really couldn't help myself just then. You guys don't mind, do you?" She remembered something, and she gently closed her oil paper umbrella. At almost the exact same moment, the torrential downpour suddenly came to a stop. Not a single drop of rain remained in the sky. "Dare I ask, milady, what eventually happens to the scholars who are invited to your residence?" Lin Shui asked with a smile. The female ghost started to walk forward again, with the smile vanishing from her face. "Them? In the end, I'll cut these scholars who have betrayed their promises in half at the waist. After helping them stop their bleeding, I'll plant them in my garden, because I want to know whether these so-called scholars that my husband always talked about will also bloom in the soil. Will they also yield fruitful results? However, they always leave me bitterly disappointed. They merely transform into racks of dry bone. However, maybe it's because these people can't be regarded as genuine scholars yet. So your arrival here truly filled me with immense happiness." Lin Shui's expression was livid. Li Baoping shook in anger. Meanwhile, Li Huai decided to simply cover his ears and mumble, I'm not listening. I used to like scholars in the past. However, I detest disloyal people the most." The female ghost slowly looked up. There were tears of blood trickling from her eyes. Those who became obsessed in love would always suffer disappointment and betrayal. Streaks of blood started to slide down from the top of the white paper lanterns that were hovering in midair above the mountain path. In the end, the lanterns were all extinguished. In the end, I finally realized that there's not a single scholar in the world who isn't a disloyal person. The female ghost's face was covered in blood. She casually tossed her oil paper umbrella aside, the umbrella that had once been the token of love between her and her husband. She covered her face with both hands, and the aggrieved sobs that she tried so hard to suppress softly seeped out from between her fingers. "Husband, I don't blame you. Please come back." On the two sides of the mountain path, the white paper lanterns that were hovering in midair with no branches to hang on had already transformed into large red lanterns. Swaying in the wind, sanguine blood bubbled like boiling water and sent beads of blood crashing onto the sides of the lanterns, giving rise to a crisp and eerie crackling sound. The female ghost continued to cry by herself, and she remained unwilling to remove her hands from her face. She completely ignored the Yin god. The Yin god's mind fluctuated slightly, and he used the voice of his mind to secretly communicate with Lin Shui. He told the young boy to use the mountain aura talisman whenever he got the opportunity. This was a talisman that could shatter all kinds of barriers. Afterward, he would do his best to hold the female ghost back. Once the path to the underworld was shattered, Lin Shui and the others could flee from this area and leave the mountain. They didn't need to worry about him. The Yin god also warned Lin Shui that they shouldn't follow this mountain path anymore. Instead, Chun Ping'an should use auspicious talisman to forge a new path. After agreeing to this, Lin Shui asked in an uncertain voice whether they should leave the slender saber auspicious talisman for him. However, the Yin god shook his head and replied that he couldn't pick this saber up at all. Its aura was far too powerful. Moreover, this saber was the best for forging a new path, as its brilliant aura would leave an aura of righteousness on the trees and vegetation that it made contact with. This was an aura that would innately restrain Yin entities. Thus, it could prevent their enemy from employing any more ghostly tricks. Wiping her face and removing her hands, the female ghost once again revealed her colorless and deathly pale face. There was a sinister smile on her face as she remarked, "You came without invitation, and now you're trying to leave without bidding farewell. Such acts are not the acts of virtuous people." The Yin god's appearance became blurry, and his figure rapidly dissolved away like a melting candle. In the end, he transformed into a ball of tumultuous ink-black smoke that charged at the female ghost. The female ghost raised a hand and flicked her sleeve, causing the large sleeve to open up like a bird's wing and create a shield in front of her. Even so, The force of the collision still sent the female ghost stumbling back 25 or so meters. As she retreated, the sanguine lanterns directly above her also exploded one after another. The blood inside the lanterns didn't spray into the surroundings, and they instead flew toward the female ghost who had been forced back by the Yin god. They were like swallows returning to their nests, and this was a similar sight to how the old Taoist priest had used the soul-summoning banner to absorb the essence of the remnant souls. "Get ready to follow me," Lin Shuyi said in a solemn voice. "We'll discuss things further after we leave this mountain path. Chan Ping'an will need to forge a new path through the woods afterward, and Senior Yin God said that you should use auspicious talisman to do so." Chan Ping'an nodded and replied, "I'll go and put the old Taoist priest on my back first. We can't just ignore him and leave him to die." The blind old Taoist priest was barely breathing as he lay a dozen or so paces away from them. Chan Ping'an sprinted over and slung the pitiful old man on his back. He then turned around and returned to the group. Lin Shuyi stood still and pinched a yellow paper talisman with 2 fingers. At the same time, he quietly recited an incantation under his breath. This was a barrier-shattering talisman, one type of the mountain and water talismans. According to the Yin god's explanation, there were hundreds upon thousands of types of mountain and water talismans. These were talismans that Qi refiners definitely needed to bring with them when they set off on long journeys or entered mountains and rivers. This was in order to prevent themselves from facing so-called ghost-hitting-the-wall situations, as the commoners often like to call it. More precisely, these talismans were used to defend against mountain-guarding formations set by their fellow cultivators, or to defend against the evil schemes of powerful mountain ghosts and spirits. This would be especially important when they entered the ruins of ancient battlefields, unmarked burial grounds, and other similar places. Without a few barrier-shattering talismans, yang energy illumination talismans, or 3 pure ones, 1 mind-calming talismans, one would essentially be walking headfirst into a trap, unarmed and defenseless. Lin Shuyi suddenly opened his eyes. In the depths of them, a streak of gold quickly flashed past. "Follow the talisman," he said in a solemn voice. The others looked over, only to see the barrier-shattering talisman float away from Lin Shuyi's fingers and hover in mid-air at head height. It started to flutter around, and it looked much like a drunkard trying to find their way home. The talisman stopped after nearing the side of the mountain path that hugged the mountain face, and Li Huai asked, "Does it want us to smash headfirst into the mountain?" Lin Shuyi was the first to stride forward, and his figure suddenly disappeared into the mountain. Li Baoping and Li Huai followed after him. Behind them, Chan Ping'an carried the old Taoist priest and led the donkey as he also vanished from the mountain path. The yellow paper talisman initially wanted to follow them into the mountain as well. However, as if being stealthily tugged by someone, it immediately became exhausted of spiritual energy and limply floated to the floor. The 4 children reappeared in the depths of a dense forest. They exchanged glances, and even Lin Shuyi, who had activated the barrier-shattering talisman, was baffled and at a complete loss. Chan Ping'an asked Lin Shuyi to carry the old Taoist priest for him first. He then climbed a tall tree and observed the surroundings from its highest point. They were seemingly located in a ravine surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. Even with Chan Ping'an's exceptional eyesight, he still couldn't see the surroundings clearly. He could only see a blurry outline. Before leaving the mountain path, the Yin god and the female ghost had been engaged in an intense battle in the distance. The sound of exploding lanterns had been ceaseless and lingering. After using the barrier-shattering talisman to flee, however, their surroundings suddenly became completely silent. The forest was deathly quiet, and not a single rustle could be heard. This huge contrast didn't ease Li Huai's mind, and it instead caused him to feel even more terrified and uneasy. Chan Ping'an took a deep breath before gripping the slender saber auspicious talisman and saying, "No matter what, we'll head toward the south first. Only that side isn't blocked by towering mountains." In a ravine littered with towering ancient trees, there were neat rows of tall buildings resting together to form a splendid residence. The size and extravagance of this residence were even superior to that of generals and ministers in the mortal world, and perhaps only the residences of county kings could rival it. A plaque with the golden characters "Beautiful Water, Noble Wind" hung high upon the gate of the residence, and the strokes of these characters were filled with such vigorous power that they looked like the work of an immortal. Outside the gate was a pair of large stone lions, with each measuring a height equivalent to 2 humans tall. One of the stone lions was reaching forward with its paw and holding down a stone child that was as large as a person. The stone lion appeared mighty and imposing. The air rippled, and an old man dressed in azure and holding a large red lantern walked out from within this disturbance. He was none other than the palace minister from the ritual office of the Ministry of Personnel. The old man sighed, and his brows were knitted into a deep frown. It was clear that he believed that this visit would be a very troublesome one. He stuck the handle of the lantern under one of the stone lion's feet, and the initially dark and gloomy residence that was cold and empty instantly became suffused with light. Up high and down low, in the distance and nearby, almost 1,000 lanterns lit up at exactly the same time. Countless doors were pushed open, and no fewer than 100 people walked out. Beautiful young women, old stewards, stablemen and chefs, servants and maids, gardeners and housekeepers, and so on. It was as if they had all received an order from their master at the same time, and were just about to start work. However, almost all of them were deathly pale, with not a hint of expression in their eyes. In a garden inside the residence, the lame young boy and the round-faced little girl were huddled together as they leaned against a wall. Blood flowed from the 7 orifices on the lame young boy's face, and it was clear that he had already suffered severe injuries. He most likely wouldn't be able to walk many steps even if he were allowed to leave. In order to fight against the astonishingly powerful female ghost just then, the lame young boy had summoned the silver characters, subduing demons and capturing ghosts, from the banner and into the acupoints in his face. This was a sinister technique that would severely harm his mind and soul. Meanwhile, the little girl had cut her hands and arms several times, causing her to lose far too much blood. This was made even worse by the fact that she had come into contact with some of the female ghost's energy. She was still dizzy at this moment, and she felt like she wanted to hurl. When the lanterns lit up, the lame young boy's expression became even grimmer. He hurriedly reached over to cover the little girl's eyes. What appeared before the young boy were racks of dry and decaying skeletons. In fact, only the upper half of these skeletons were visible above the ground. They were packed densely together, and it was as if they were being planted like vegetables in a garden. There were at least 40 to 50 sets of skeletons. The lame young boy felt a slight sense of despair. This was because one of the skeletons surprisingly had a faint golden spine. Its limbs were also as pure white as fine jade. And it was clear that this person had been a chi refiner who had already reached the middle 5 tiers and achieved a golden branch and jade leaves. According to the blind old Taoist priest, only chi refiners who were extremely powerful among their peers in the middle 5 tiers could achieve this kind of phenomenon. As for the old Taoist priest who could barely reach the doorstep of the middle 5 tiers, he hadn't even managed to cultivate a golden branch yet, so how could he possibly cultivate jade leaves? No wonder he had lost so comprehensively. The gulf between their power was far too immense. The gate of the residence opened, showing its greatest respect as it welcomed one of the 3 most powerful palace ministers of the Greatly Empire. However, the old man didn't enter. Instead, he sat down on the gate threshold and looked at the wide path outside the residence. "Lady Chu, can you listen to me and not make things difficult for those young children?" he asked softly. Next to the gate, the large red lantern resting beneath the stone lion's feet started to shudder violently. As the lantern wildly swung back and forth, the 4 bright red characters, "Souls homeward ye go," also started to ripple with wisps of sanguine light. The old man's voice became firmer as he warned, "Lady Chu, if anything happens to those children in your territory, to say nothing of this residence, even the Greatly Empire will suffer great calamity as a result." However, it was a shame that there was still no reply. "Lady Chu," the old man called in slight anger. An old man who looked like a steward appeared at the gate. He was wearing a felt hat, and his hands were clasped behind his hunched back. He coughed before chuckling softly and saying, "The Greatly Empire has already recognized these mountains and waters as young mistress territory for countless years. Young mistress has also peacefully coexisted with the Greatly Empire this entire time. In fact, I heard that many years before I even became the steward of this residence, some previous emperor of the Greatly Empire once became indebted to young mistress. Even now, the golden character's iron certificate too with the character's eternal harmony of mountains and rivers is still displayed in the residence. After that unfortunate event, all of the emperors from the previous ones to the current one tacitly allow young mistress to vent her anger. Why is today any different? The old man in azure turned around to look at the old steward wearing the felt hat. Not only is today different, but Lady Chu won't be allowed to mutilate and kill passing scholars in the future anymore either, he said slowly. I'll naturally explain the reason to Lady Chu. However, if Lady Chu isn't willing to stop or face me, then don't blame the Greatly Empire for being merciless. The old steward patted his chest to stop his coughing. He smiled and replied, the Greatly Empire is facing turmoil right now, so unless Master Ruan personally comes over, young mistress genuinely won't be afraid of anyone. Even if she can't defeat some of the secret honored members of the Greatly Empire, will the Empire truly have the courage to dig up hundreds of kilometers of mountains and sever the embroidered flower river if young mistress decides to go into hiding? Will you not be afraid of affecting Go Table Mountain, and that descended jewel's small world? The palace minister's expression was dark, and he replied, our lord isn't an honored member of the Greatly Empire whose ego is even bigger than the heavens. He's always detested those who take a mile when given an inch. The gate slowly closed, and the old steward stood inside the residence and smiled with squinted eyes, saying, young mistress has given a reply. She said that the Greatly Empire can test her out. Then test her we will. The palace minister from the Ministry of Rights shook his head. He was also a straightforward person, so he didn't say anything else to try to convince Lady Chu. Instead, he directly walked down the steps and retrieved his large red lantern, tossing it into the sky. His figure slowly faded away. Meanwhile, the lantern rose into the sky like a red moon. Chan Ping'an and the others had solemn expressions as they stood on the street outside the large residence. None of them had imagined that they would suddenly come across such an extravagant residence deep within the wild mountain forests. Chan Ping'an had been responsible for hacking away the branches and shrubs with auspicious talisman and clearing a path for them. Right now, he was also panting in slight exertion. This wasn't because he had expended a lot of energy, but it was because there was a heavy feeling weighing on his mind. The blind old Taoist priest on Lin Shui's back finally stopped playing dead. He slapped himself and said through tears, who would have thought that the female ghost would be so powerful? Yet, I actually dared to provoke her, and I even dreamed about slaying demons and vanquishing fiends. Oh, my old eyes have truly gone blind. Indeed, my useless eyes haven't gone blind for nothing. Lin Shui was given a huge fright, and he hurriedly let the old Taoist priest jump down from his back. Li Huai hid behind Li Baoping, and Li Baoping's face was also slightly pale as she tugged Chan Ping'an's sleeve and asked in a quiet voice, Junior uncle, are you afraid? Chan Ping'an raised an arm to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He nodded and replied, of course I'm afraid. However, there's no need to worry. There's still me and Lin Shui. I felt like I could give it a try before, but now? My measly abilities are only enough to elicit a slight wag of her fingers, Lin Shui said with a bitter smile. Chan Ping'an placed auspicious talisman in its scabbard and returned it to Li Baoping. When he saw the puzzled expressions on her and Lin Shui's faces, he explained, let me try in a moment. That female ghost isn't afraid of auspicious talisman and isn't afraid of Lin Shui's talismans, but she's actually afraid of fists? Li Huai asked with a naive expression. Chan Ping'an didn't reply, and he started to calm his breathing and focus his mind in front of the residence with the plaque, Beautiful Water, Noble Wind. Perhaps feeling that death was imminent, the blind old Taoist priest suddenly went mad and started to utter nonsensical gibberish. Inside his sleeves, Lin Shui held a talisman in each hand, the pearl within a plate and fiery rain. He would try his best, but the rest would be up to the will of the heavens. Beside him, Chan Ping'an was silently controlling the wandering dragon-like wisp of qi in his body. He visited his 2 acupoints to confirm that the wisps of sword qi were still present and undisturbed. How did he confirm this? This was actually very simple. As long as the fiery dragon that brought a warm and fuzzy feeling to his meridians didn't dare to stop in front of those acupoints, then it would signify that the 2 wisps of extremely small sword qi were definitely still present. This time, Chan Ping'an felt like a single wisp of sword qi wouldn't necessarily be enough to kill that female ghost in the wedding dress. If that were the case, Then he would unleash both wisps of sword chi. His heart would definitely ache afterward, but this was definitely better than dying. However, Chen Ping'an's heart was in fact already aching in pain before he had even used a single wisp of sword chi. Thus, the miserly young boy's expression appeared slightly stiff. There was also a strong sense of killing intent. Li Huai suddenly discovered that the white donkey next to him was forcefully stomping the ground again and again. Compared to its irritation and unease in the morning, the white donkey was seemingly a little happy and delighted at this moment. Even when the female ghost appeared on top of the steps in front of the residence, the white donkey still only slowed down its stomping very slightly. The female ghost glanced down at her bright red wedding dress, which was damaged and ripped in several areas. She suppressed her boiling rage and turned to look at the young children in front of her. She then gracefully hovered down. Turning slightly and performing a curtsy, the female ghost said in a soft and gentle voice, "Welcome to my residence, esteemed guests. You can call me Lady Chu. It's a shame that my husband is still yet to return from his distant journey, so I have no option but to come out and host you myself." Inside the small bamboo forest in Go Table Mountain that was concealed by a formation, Wei Bo, who had seized the opportunity to recover his status as a mountain god, gazed at the mountainous pile of cut bamboo in front of him. These were the stalks of bamboo that Aoyang had felled with a single slash. Even though Wei Bo had obtained far more than he had lost during all this commotion, personally seeing these stalks of lush green bamboo that had drawn spiritual energy from Go Table Mountain for thousands of years lying there was still like looking at a beautiful woman who had been hacked apart at the waist. He couldn't help but sigh. Wei Bo was already using the power of illusion of his pale gold earring, and others would still be unable to detect him even if he revealed his true body in his territory. This was the same case even for the black python. He started to lightly snap his fingers, and the stalks of bamboo on the ground started to disappear one by one. After collecting all of it, Wei Bo left the bamboo forest and saw the black python trembling and lying coiled up nearby. There was a young swordsman standing there with his sword hanging horizontally behind his waist. Beside him, there was a familiar acquaintance, tilting his head up and gulping down wine. This was the powerful cultivator from the Great Li Empire, who Aoyang had sent flying back to Go Table Mountain while soaring to the capital. Wei Bo only knew that his surname was Lu. In the end, he had been carried away by that swordsman. Wei Bo had a slightly puzzled expression. The man had been on the brink of death not long ago, yet in such a short time, he had already recovered and was up and about again, even though he still appeared slightly sluggish. However, even those who practiced top-notch physique-refining secret techniques wouldn't be able to recover so quickly and so comprehensively. Of course, it was indeed the case that those who reached the last 2 tiers of the middle 5 tiers would all have their own secret abilities and trump cards. Thus, Wei Bo naturally wouldn't question him about this. Buddhist monks wouldn't discuss surnames, and Taoist priests wouldn't discuss lifespans. This was something that everyone knew. After wiping the wine from the corners of his mouth, the strong and burly man said in a deep voice, "Old Mountain Lord of Go Table Mountain, my name is Lu Yu. Even though I don't especially like you, I'll definitely repay you for saving my life in the future. If you have any urgent requests, then just crush this message talisman. If I'm not occupied with the tasks assigned by the Imperial Court, then I'll definitely come over to help you even if I'm in the southernmost old dragon city of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent." The burly man casually tossed Wei Bo a beautiful white jade tablet. After catching it, Wei Bo chuckled. "Frank in terms of what you like and detest, open and upright in manner, and in possession of this peace and safety tablet that's unique to militarian sects and temples. Lu Yu, are you a cultivator from Wind Snow Temple or True Martial Mountain? Is that any of your business?" The burly man humped coldly. Having just returned from the embroidered flower river, the young swordsman smiled and said, "Lu Yu is a typical sharp-tongued but soft-hearted person. Please don't mind him." Wei Bo hurriedly waved his hands and replied, "I wouldn't dare." The swordsman casually rested his elbows on his longsword and said with a warm smile, "There's coincidentally some impromptu matter that I have to deal with in Dragon Spring County. If you don't mind, then do you want to leave the mountain with us? Even though I already notified County Magistrate Wu Yuan beforehand, meaning that there shouldn't be any issues, what I'm afraid of is the potential for things to go awry. After all, not only is a geomantic official from the Ministry of Astronomy in Downtrodden Mountain now, but there are also many external forces there. After just improving the relationship between you and the Great Li Empire slightly, I definitely don't wish to see things fall apart again. Judging from the commotion of the battle not long ago, it can't be that a formal god of the 5 mountains has been killed, right? Weibo replied in a seemingly casual manner. What, can I also seize this opportunity to grab a small slice of the cake? Could it be that this so-called impromptu matter that you speak of genuinely has something to do with me? The rough and reckless-looking Lu Yu squinted his eyes. However, the young swordsman remained calm and relaxed as he chuckled. Rest assured, I definitely won't kick others to the curb when they've outlived their usefulness. Regarding the eventual outcome of this trip to Dragon Spring County, it's all up to what you, Weibo, desire. The imperial court of the Great Li Empire definitely won't force others to do something that they're unwilling to do. As for the specifics of this matter, to tell you the truth, I'm not too sure about it either. I only know that the emperor attached great importance to this matter after hearing about it. In the end, he specifically reminded us to treat them with courtesy. Weibo sighed and said, I've always had a stinky temperament where I'm easily persuaded by reason but can't be cowed by force. Since you're asking me like this, how can I possibly refuse? I'm truly afraid of you people. Shouldn't you yield to neither persuasion nor force? Lu Yu sneered. Thank you for the praise, thank you, Weibo said with a smile. The young swordsman glanced at the obedient and docile black python and said in amusement, Your vision is fairly impressive. However, remember not to cause any trouble when you go to Downtrodden Mountain in the future. There's a member of your species residing in the lake of a nearby mountain, so even if you two fight in the future, it's best that you don't affect any of the mortals in that area. Apart from this, there's nothing else that's worth looking out for. Since you're a mountain spirit of the Great Li Empire now, you at least don't need to worry about being casually hunted and killed by the passing cultivators anymore. The black python earnestly nodded in reply. After ingesting the snake gall pebbles from Jewel's small world, its body had surprisingly shrunk in size instead of growing any larger. However, its 4 dragon-like claws had become even thicker than before, and the ink-black scales covering its body had also become increasingly bright and lustrous. At the same time, a thin golden line that was difficult to notice had also appeared on its abdomen. Because there was still no one residing between here and Dragon Spring County, there was no need for them to rest in the mornings and travel at night, even though they were bringing the black python with them. When they arrived at the Iron Talisman River, the black python carefully slid into the water after receiving permission from the young swordsman. Even though it was extremely delighted, it still did its best to suppress its instinct. It didn't dare to wantonly twist its body and slap the river water. The 3 people stood on the black python's back, and it was as if they were passengers on a boat as they casually glided north along the Iron Talisman River. Weibo frowned and lightly flicked his sleeves. He then scooped some water into his hand and swished it around as if he were trying to determine its weight. There was surprise in his voice as he exclaimed, I'm aware that the Iron Talisman was elevated from a river to a great river, but... The young swordsman explained the situation to him, saying, After successfully fusing into the Iron Talisman River, the river goddess here encountered another rare opportunity. This caught the attention of a geomantic official, who hurriedly reported the situation to the imperial court. The emperor was delighted, and he promoted the river 1 more level after having promoted it twice already. Weibo gently moved his hand around, causing the river water in his palm to slowly spin in circles. He clucked his tongue in wonder and remarked, Then hasn't this fortunate person who became the new river goddess of Iron Talisman River already reached the highest level in the mortal mountain and river genealogical records? Interesting, how very interesting. In just a few days she's already completed the journey that takes her colleagues many hundreds or even thousands of years. Such talent and fortune is simply astonishing. This is a destiny granted by the heavens. Most importantly, the promotion of this river goddess seemingly hasn't resulted in an encroachment on the fortune of the other waterways. I have to say that the Great Li Empire is truly quite fortunate. The young swordsman's expression finally became serious for the first time, and he asked, Weibo, are you sure that her promotion hasn't encroached on the fortunes of the other mountains and rivers? Are you sure that her fortunes have all come from the initially small Iron Talisman River? Weibo smiled and remained silent. Once the formal god of the northern mountain of Divine Water Nation, His observations were naturally keen and not something that the geomantic officials from the Ministry of Astronomy could compare to. Indeed, these geomantic officials could only be regarded as amateurs among experts. Due to the battle with Aoyang not long ago, the mountains and rivers in the Great Li Empire were ebbing and flowing in their fortunes, causing the fortunes of the empire to also waver. At the same time, 3 of the 5 formal gods of the 5 mountains had also been severely wounded, so the matters pertaining to the other mountains and rivers could only be managed by the geomantic officials for the moment. Weibo, I'm sure that this information alone can reap you rich rewards from the imperial court, the young swordsman said in a solemn voice. Weibo looked up, and the gentle breeze brushed against his face. At this moment, the already ethereal-looking young man appeared even more like a transcendent immortal. His gaze was gentle, and he asked with a faint smile, "Can I swap it for a small fated opportunity? For example, creating a smoother path to immortality for a new disciple in the Palace of Eternal Spring for the next 100 years? This is a disciple who already has the talent to reach the middle 5 tiers. This isn't difficult," the young swordsman replied with a smile. "I feel guilt toward the Lu clan of Divine Water Nation." Weibo murmured softly. How many years ago was that? Even mountain gods and river gods who enjoy lifespans as long as empires aren't as foolishly sentimental at you. Lu Yu grumbled in impatience. When empires collapse, it's already a huge fortune if your gold statue doesn't crumble along with it. If you're able to serve the new empire and continue to enjoy incense and offerings, then that's an even greater fortune than one can only dream of. Even if you're indebted to the Lu clan of Divine Water Nation, that was already something from several hundred years ago. Regardless of whether they deserved to die or not, all of them had already died. So why the hell are you still acting so melodramatic? Weibo completely ignored him. The only thing that reverberated in his ears was the gentle lapping of the river water. Stubborn fool. And to think that I actually owe you a favor. Ah, such a great misfortune. The staunch Lu Yu fumed. The young swordsman laughed heartily and said, "Bad fate is still fate. You two should just accept this and endure it. I wonder if Old Lantern will clash with Lady Chu in his trip down south," Lu Yu remarked casually. "If they get into a fight, I'd wager that Old Lantern will come out worse for wear." The young swordsman shook his head and said, "I hope everything goes smoothly without trouble. Lady Chu is extremely important to the Great Li Empire. Moreover, she's also the type of resolute person who would choose to fight to the death without any hesitation if things truly came to that. If you weren't severely wounded, and if that woman hadn't needed to return to the Palace of Eternal Spring so urgently to pick up Her Majesty, then I wouldn't have asked Palace Minister Han to accept the task of escorting them down south. Palace Minister Han is amiable on the outside and firm on the inside, and his temper is actually even worse than yours." Lu Yu roared with laughter and said, "No worries, I'm sure everything is fine. As long as there aren't any elegant and talented scholars in the group, then Lady Chu naturally won't take a fancy to them. In fact, if Old Lantern were 30 or 40 years younger, then he might have genuinely been kept in her residence to act as her husband. If you're so brave, then why don't you repeat this in front of Lady Chu?" the young swordsman teased. "If she dares to leave her territory, then I'll dare to repeat this in front of her," Lu Yu chuckled. The young swordsman sighed with emotion and commented, "Sages are referred to as sages because they possess their own small world. When they reside in this small world, they can enjoy all of opportune time, geographical advantage, and popular support. It's a shame that you're a swordsman, master," Lu Yu said with pity. "Such powers can't be achieved by swordsmen. Otherwise, if your offensive ability and ability to kill is unrivaled, and you also enjoy the defenses of a sage's small world, then..." The young swordsman raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "I already have a sword, so is this not enough?" Only at this moment did the ordinary-looking swordsman give one a dazzling and almost blinding feeling. There was a forced smile on Lu Yu's face. Weibo suddenly stood up straight and looked into the distance, only to see a woman sitting on the branch of a willow tree that was horizontally extended above the river. She was dressed in azure robes, and there was a face armor concealing her appearance. Her hair was long and a rare pale gold color, and it extended all the way to the surface of the Iron Talisman River where it gently undulated with the water. For some reason, Weibo recalled a popular line from a poem. "Entering the water, the willow flowers undulate like duckweed." When the young swordsman saw the woman, he quietly explained, "She's the river goddess of the Iron Talisman River. She's only just formed her godly body, and the imperial court is still yet to construct a river god shrine for her. As such, her spirit is still slightly unstable." Without turning around, Weibo asked, "What's her name?" "This little lady's name is as good as can be Donghua, as in water element Willowry." Lu Yu humphed coldly. "She's enjoyed heaven-rivaling fortune this entire time. Fortune that's enough to make others go green with envy. She was born in the countryside, and after being chosen by a geomantic official for her impressive aptitude, she further received recognition from the renowned Taoist sword talisman in the capital. And now, she's even been promoted to a lofty river goddess with few peers. With her good fortune, is she not going to ascend to the heavens in the future?" Weibo's expression returned to normal, and he sat down on the black python's back and observed, "Oh, so she has the aptitude of a rain goddess. No wonder her journey has been as smooth sailing as wind and water. With such a powerful neighbor who I'll see all the time, heaven knows whether this will be a good or a bad thing." Even though the young swordsman found this comment slightly strange, he couldn't put his finger on what exactly he found strange about it. However, to display the aptitude of a rain goddess was indeed a rare once-in-a-century event. Riding on the back of the black python, Weibo and the others glided past the flowing willow tree. The river goddess Donghua paid no heed to them. In divine water nation of yore, poets were abundant and especially renowned for creating poems of farewell. Once sung and passed on by the women in the brothels, these poems would often shoot to fame and quickly sweep through the entire continent. In these poems, poplar flowers were equivalent to willow flowers. However, just like the rough and burly Lu Yu had said, these things were all ancient history. If Weibo didn't explain this, who would care? Even if he did explain it, who would be willing to listen? Only Confucian sages had once left an annotation, poplar, that from which willows sprout 5. Weibo suddenly turned around, yet the river goddess Donghua was already nowhere to be seen. At this moment, in some place even further south than Go Table Mountain, a large red lantern slowly rose into the sky. The young swordsman placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and said with a grim expression, "By the looks of it, I need to personally take a trip down south." However, right at this moment, in some majestic mountain on the border of the Great Li Empire, a dash of white shot out from the mountaintop and rapidly flew toward the north. Like a brilliant comet, an extremely long streak of snow-white light trailed behind it. This was actually the sword chi of a flying sword. Moreover, the owner of the flying sword was nowhere to be seen. The sword chi was both long and weighty. After a while, the sword landed not far away from the banks of the embroidered flower river, shattering the formation that was almost as powerful as a sage's handiwork with a single thrust. The sword landed precisely in front of a white donkey, shattering the heavenly barrier. The sword landed on the street in front of the extravagant residence. Meanwhile, the long comet-like trail of sword chi didn't dissipate even long after the sword had finished its journey through the air and the powerful barrier. Instead, it lingered like a ray of blinding sunshine shooting into a dreary and lifeless room. As if it had come across an old friend in a foreign town, the white donkey started to joyously run circles around the sword. Lady Chu was clearly dumbfounded. As the owner of these mountains and rivers, she could clearly sense the might of this sword better than anyone else. The foundations of the mountains shuddered, and the water in the rivers boiled. If she hadn't used her aura to envelop the residents behind her, then it was very likely that the close to 1,000 lanterns hanging inside it would have been extinguished in a single breath as well. The female ghost was both astonished and enraged. She didn't look at where the sword had landed, and she instead turned to glower at the irreparable fissure in the dark sky. At the same time, beads of blood started to seep out from her bright red wedding dress. Like beads of water rolling across a lotus leaf, more and more blood seeped from her wedding dress, eventually connecting together to form a pool. She waved her sleeves and roared in fury. "Those who dare to trespass, death penalty. Impudent sword immortal. I'm going to twist your head off and plant it in my garden. I'm going to make you live a torturous life for tens upon hundreds of years." A loud laugh traveled over from the distance, and in the end, this voice gathered onto the flying sword. Not only was this voice gentle and honest, but it even possessed a unique charm. It was as if a gentle spring breeze were washing over them as a noble disciple told them a romantic story. However, the soaring pride in the voice was unconcealed as it said, "Please wait for a moment, young girl. My physical body is yet to completely stabilize, so I'm unable to travel as quickly as my flying sword. However, I do wonder what the scenery in your garden is like. My garden isn't large, and the scenery isn't anything to write home about either. However, it's good enough to plant an extra head." The deathly pale face of the female ghost became livid purple and increasingly eerie. Her smile was sinister, and 2 streams of sanguine water shot out from her large sleeves and rushed toward the fissure in the sky. "Sword arrives, filth subsides," someone declared loudly. The dense barrier shuddered violently. After rushing upward and converging at the fissure in the sky, the 2 streams of blood suddenly exploded apart and shot out in all directions. It was as if it were raining blood. The female ghost shuddered, and she lightly shook her sleeves. Countless drops of blood returned to the sleeves of her wedding dress. A young man dressed in white robes descended from the sky. There was a layer of misty white aura around him, and it was as if he were surrounded by the mists of a large lake or the astral energy of a mountain peak. His hair was bound, yet it was neither decorated with a hairpin nor covered by a crown. His index finger and middle finger were held together to form a sword, and there was a majestic column of sword chi that was as thick as a muscular arm emanating from his body. This was a blinding column of sword chi, and it was like a white flood dragon as it rapidly soared around the surroundings. The drops of blood and the dark aura of filth instantly dissipated upon being struck by this radiant sword chi. The handsome young man who looked no older than 30 gracefully landed between the female ghost and the group of children led by Chan Ping'an. With a whoosh, the flying sword on the ground flew to the man's side, with the tip of its blade directly pointing at the plaque that read, "Beautiful water, noble wind." The man retracted his 2 fingers, causing the powerful and seemingly tangible column of sword chi to momentarily falter. He glanced back, and he came to a sudden realization when he saw the little girl in red with the small bamboo bookcase. He suddenly remembered that the old item that had once accompanied him through thick and thin for many years already no longer belonged to him. A carefree smile appeared on his face, and with a wave of his hand, Li Baoping's green bamboo bookcase shuddered slightly. The small silver gourd hidden inside trembled gently, and a snow-white flying sword that was only 2 inches long flew out from the sword-nurturing gourd. The column of sword chi reluctantly flew inside the flying sword. Afterward, the flying sword quickly dashed toward the young man's glabella, disappearing in a flash. The sword immortal massaged his glabella and said in amusement, "Why don't we treat this entire continent as our home in the future? You're not a young girl waiting for marriage in your room anymore, so there's no need for you to coop yourself up in that building all the time." There was a spring in the white donkey's steps as it clip-clopped up to the young man and affectionately nudged his shoulder with its head. The man smiled faintly as he reached over to stroke the white donkey's head. "Long time no see, old friend. I've truly missed you." Following the young man's forceful entry, the fissure in the sky had already slowly closed up. However, this had used up a large amount of spiritual energy from the mountains and rivers. In just a short moment, almost 50 years of accumulated energy was flushed away, transforming into nothing more than polluted air. Lady Chu regained her composure and she sneered, "A sword by the waist externalizing sword chi, and a bonded flying sword. Each is more powerful than the former. What an outstanding terrestrial sword immortal. You're probably not from the Great Li Empire, right?" The sword immortal who had suddenly appeared from out of nowhere smiled faintly and replied, "I'm nothing more than rootless duckweed, someone with no roots and no ties. My name isn't worth mentioning." After saying this, the man didn't only turn his head around, but he instead turned his entire body around, boldly exposing his back to the female ghost. Having just exited seclusion, the terrestrial sword immortal's voice was gentle as he explained, "I can be regarded as somewhat of a friend of Aoyang-s. I'm only somewhat. The other part of our relationship is me being somewhat of a disciple of his. However, it's a shame that Aoyang isn't willing to acknowledge this. He said that my nature is too pedantic, and that I'm also too soft-handed when I deal with matters. Because of this, I'm never quick enough when I draw my blade. He can't bear to embarrass himself by acknowledging me as his disciple. In any case, I rushed over from far away because I sensed the presence of my old friend and also the anomaly inside the sword-nurturing gourd. Forgive me for asking, but where is Aoyang? And who are you children? We're also Aoyang's friends, Chen Ping'an explained. The gourd was given to Li Baoping by Aoyang, and Li Huai was responsible for looking after the donkey. As for where Aoyang went, I'm sure you'll hear about it in the future. Compared to the female ghost, Li Huai, who always had strange thoughts running around in his mind, felt much more familiar with this terrestrial sword immortal who claimed to be Aoyang's friend. In his view, wouldn't Aoyang's friend be his friend as well? In terms of whether he was an immortal or not, could this be more important than the fact that they were friends? However, the incident on the ship had traumatized Li Huai, and he no longer dared to speak so carelessly. Nonetheless, he continued to gesture to the white donkey with his eyes. The young swordsman attentively listened to Chen Ping'an's explanation, and in the end he nodded and said, I largely understand the situation now. Almost everyone noticed a sudden but slight tremor coming from the earth. It was as if an aeon were turning its body, and it was as if the mountain range were about to collapse. The female ghost's expression changed drastically. She wanted to leave, yet she discovered that a bonded flying sword had already sealed off her path of retreat. A snow-white flying sword had already arrived 1 meter before her forehead at some unknown time. She was filled with rage and she roared, Palace Minister Han, great river god of the embroidered flower river, are you two not going to do anything about this? If that Een god truly severs the mountain route here, not only will the embroidered flower river and the 2 other great rivers be affected, but which of Go Table Mountain, Iron Talisman River, and Dragon Whisker River in the north will be spared? Which of them won't be affected? Holding a large red lantern in his hand, there stood an old man in the sky beyond the barrier. He chuckled coldly and replied, Lady Chu, where has your imposing and confident manner disappeared to? The female ghost's expression became grim. Standing beside the old man was a god suited in armor, and with an azure snake coiled around his arm. He was here to lighten the mood, lest conflict break out between Palace Minister Han and the female ghost and affect the fortune of the Great Li Empire. His voice was solemn as he said, Lady Chu, Palace Minister Han and I can ask the Een god to stop his actions of severing the mountain route. However, we hope that Lady Chu can remain calm and refrain from any provocative speech as well. The female ghost smiled and replied, What if I want to spar with this great sword immortal? Is this also a provocative request? Palace Minister Han chuckled in anger and spat. Oh, how benevolent of you, Lady Chu. I've truly learned a valuable lesson today. Very well. Very well. The Ministry of Rights of the Great Li Empire will definitely thank you in the future. You're nothing but a measly palace minister, yet you still dare to utter such wanton and threatening words? Are you trying to scare a little child? The female ghost sneered. You'll only have the right to order me around when you become the minister in charge of the Ministry of Rights. The azure snake on the great river god's arm hissed rapidly, sending plumes of white mist into the air. The great river god was clearly more familiar with the imperial court and future direction of the Great Li Empire than the secluded female ghost, and there was displeasure on his face as he warned, Lady Chu. The female ghost held a hand to her mouth as she giggled. At the same time, she turned slightly and held her dress with her other hand, performing a curtsy and saying, Then my apologies to Lord Han. The old man's face was red with anger, yet he chose to remain silent for the sake of the stability of the mountains and rivers in the Great Li Empire. Otherwise, with Lady Chu's habit of wantonly and brutally killing passing scholars, would the Great Li Empire have chosen to turn a blind eye for so many dozens of years? However, the old man had never felt that the imperial court's decision was incorrect. This was a majestic empire that was destined to last for thousands of years and tens of thousands of generations. What did a few dead scholars matter? What did their innocence or guilt matter? If he weren't an official of the Great Li Empire, and if he weren't the palace minister of the Ministry of Rights responsible for contacting and recruiting Qi refiners, then his temperament and identity as a Confucianism disciple would have definitely pushed him to resolutely attack the female ghost. He would do so even if this meant an internecine outcome. However, during his ascension to his current position, he had witnessed brutal battles resulting in tens of thousands of deaths. He had witnessed the changing titles of the myriad official residences in the capital. He had witnessed assassins and spies from other nations lunging over like moth to flames, and he had witnessed battles between immortals that had ruthlessly inflicted death upon hundreds upon thousands innocent mortals. His position as palace minister dictated that he had to consider problems from a different perspective. Palace Minister Han was no longer the youth of years gone by who needed to studiously read Confucian classics. He was no longer an impoverished scholar who knew only the knowledge written on paper. In fact, for the sake of upholding the law of the Great Li Empire, he had once personally executed a brave and righteous martial artist who had been seeking revenge against immortals on behalf of innocent mortals. Before succumbing to his grave wounds, the martial artist had unleashed a torrent of abuse and sneered that the Great Li Empire was truly as comical as could be. He had scolded Palace Minister Han and labeled him a lackey of the immortals. However, Palace Minister Han had calmly told the martial artist that there would eventually come a day, perhaps in 30 years or perhaps in 50 years, when the Great Li Empire would no longer suffer from innocent deaths like this. Before drawing his final breath, the righteous martial artist had spat a mixture of spit and blood onto his face. What matters in the world were truly clear-cut in black and white. Holding the lantern in his hand, and with complicated emotions in mind, the old man looked up and gazed toward the north. For some reason, his superior didn't seem to be in a hurry to show himself or interfere. The young sword immortal paid no heed to Lady Chu and the palace minister of the Great Li Empire. As for the great river god and Yin god, he cared even less about them. He simply turned around to face the female ghost who had been stopped by his sword, smiling and asking in amusement, "You want to engage in swordplay with me?" Lady Chu smiled with squinted eyes and replied, "If we're only sparring, then I'm more than willing to. After all, this is my first time seeing a terrestrial sword immortal as young as you." The young sword immortal waved his hand, and the white donkey hurriedly ran back to Li Huai. He then reached toward the hilt of his sword before nodding and saying, "Sure thing." The female ghost squinted her eyes and replied, "Oh? You're not joking." Grabbing the hilt of his sword, the young sword immortal said in a soft voice, "High radiance." He slashed down in a simple motion. However, heaven and earth changed colors, and the small and misty world was instantly illuminated with a brilliant radiance. A burst of sword chi surged toward Lady Chu. The shocked and flustered female ghost had no time to do anything but raise her hands and block her face. Meanwhile, her large sleeves blocked her entire body. Even so, she was still ruthlessly cut into two. The anguished wails of Lady Chu reverberated around the magnificent residence that stood behind her. The servants and maids froze and fell into a trance, with blood starting to trickle from the orifices on their faces. Some of them directly collapsed to the floor and dissolved into puddles of pus. Inside the residence, there was a young lady oblivious to the fact that she was stabbing her arm again and again as she learned embroidery. There were also two guards exchanging punches and eventually obliterating each other's heads as they practiced martial arts. However, their movements continued even though only less than half of their heads remained. The female ghost hurriedly dashed toward the gate of the residence. As she did so, countless sanguine threads materialized between the two halves of her body like the fibers of lotus roots. She rapidly knitted back together as she soared through the sky. "Again," the young sword immortal said calmly. His sword swept sideways. Like the sparkling surface of water, an arc of sword light stretched across the sky. Lady Chu was severed at the waist, making her appear much like a beauty stepping out of the water. Her wedding dress softly landed on the top step in front of the residence. The female ghost transformed into wisps of chaotic smoke as she flew into the golden plaque, causing blood to continuously pitter-patter onto the floor below. At the same time, her pained and twisted face occasionally pushed against the surface of the plaque, during which she would beg, "Please spare me, sword immortal." The young immortal had only attacked twice, unleashing one downward slash and one sideward slash. Yet, this was already enough to slice the arrogant and imposing female ghost's soul into four, forcing her to return inside the plaque that maintained this small world. Indeed, this plaque was the root of the mountains and source of the rivers, and it was only inside here that the female ghost could keep herself alive. There was a common saying in the world, "Living under the eaves of others." In fact, this saying already revealed some secrets. Regardless of whether it was crossbeams or plaques that rested under the eaves, It was often the case that they were filled with secrets and mystery. Lin Shuyi's mind wavered. No wonder Aoyang had remarked that sword immortals were the most carefree, deadly, and unreasonable among qi refiners. However, it was a shame that the sword was unsuitable for Lin Shuyi, even though he was extremely talented in cultivation. He couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. However, he quickly resolved his Dao heart again. If he could rely on his supreme Dao powers to achieve victory over divinely powerful terrestrial sword immortals in the future, then wouldn't that be even better? However, Lin Shuyi was extremely aware that the terrestrial sword immortal standing in front of them was most likely a qi refiner at the legendary upper 5 tiers. If pure martial artists were regarded as inferior to qi refiners, then sword immortals could be regarded as superior to all other kinds of qi refiners. The reason for this was simple. No one was willing to fight against powerful sword immortals. It was rumored that someone had once performed some analysis before. Among those who had severed the bridge to immortality of others, 1/3 of them were sword immortals. This was even more than the military and cultivators who were decisive in battle and were reluctant to attract karmic fate. One had to realize that there existed tens of thousands of paths of cultivation, each with its own fated opportunities. There were the 100 schools of thought, the formal sects and the heretical sects, and so on and so forth. Sword immortals belonged to but one of the myriad paths. Chen Ping'an's thoughts were much simpler than Lin Shuyi's. He was only contemplating a single thing. As it turned out, swords could also be used like this. The young sword immortal held one hand behind his back and gripped his sword with the other. The same mistake shouldn't be made more than 3 times. "Lady Chu, why don't you accept one more sword strike?" he asked with a smile. A figure silently appeared under the plaque. This was also an ordinary-looking young man with a sword resting behind his waist. "Wei Jin of Wind Snow Temple, this is enough," he said slowly. "It should be Wei Jin from the Divine Platform," the sword immortal in white corrected with a smile. He said no more, and the terrestrial sword immortal who claimed that he was yet to stabilize his cultivation base immediately unleashed another slash. The young swordsman opposite him was expressionless as he gripped the hilt of his sword and slowly drew it 1 inch from its scabbard. He didn't draw his sword any further. However, a miniature and adorable mountain range surprisingly appeared between the two swordsmen. This was a winding mountain range that hovered in mid-air. The young sword immortal, Wei Jin, severed the mountain range with his slash. However, the sword intent of his slash was almost completely exhausted as a result. Wei Jin didn't persist, and he didn't unleash any further sword strikes. Some thousands of kilometers away, a gigantic fissure appeared in an undulating mountain range that stretched 50 kilometers, creating a huge canyon. It was as if the mountain range had been struck by an immortal's blade. Wei Jin smiled and asked, "Are you that person from the Mahis sect?" The young swordsman standing under the plaque had a displeased expression. "Senior Aoyang, couldn't you have at least told them my name?" "Give me a moment," he said to Wei Jin. The young swordsman turned to face the female ghost whose soul was residing in the plaque, and he said with a frown, "Lady Chu, things have already come to this, so can you please show some sincerity?" The female ghost nodded, after which the barrier in the sky slowly dissipated. This was a sign that the barrier around her territory was being lowered, akin to how mortals opened their doors to welcome guests. No matter how secluded and ignorant she had still heard about this man's many achievements. He was a wanderer from the Mahis sect, and after taking refuge in the Great Li Empire with another leading figure of Moism, he had immediately been treated as an esteemed guest by the emperor. Right now, he was an honored guardian of the Great Li Empire's capital city, and one of the most important figures overlooking the immortal forces. It was said that he would travel alone to all corners of the world whenever he had time. Every time he came across mountains or other spectacular scenery, he would transform these sights into his own sword intent. Thus, when the palace minister of the Ministry of Rites and the great river god of the embroidered flower river appeared on the street and cupped their fists in respect, the young swordsman merely nodded back in acknowledgement. This was proof enough of his transcendence standing in the Great Li Empire. The Yin god also stood beside Chen Ping'an, with his murderous aura soaring into the sky. Just then, he had been determined to sever the mountain root of this place even if it meant sacrificing his cultivation base. He had been intent on fighting to the death with the female ghost. Once the mountain root was shattered, the shield of the female ghost would also be destroyed. At that time, she would lose her ability to rival those 10th-tier cultivators. A smooth and jade-like arm reached out from within the plaque, and the red wedding dress swayed as it floated toward this hand. When the female ghost stepped out from the plaque again, she had already dressed herself back in the red wedding dress. Even though she had been cut into 4 by Wei Jin just then, leaving her teetering on the brink of death, she had still insisted on maintaining the completeness of her wedding dress. It was abundantly clear just how precious this wedding dress was to her. She was completely obsessed with it. After stepping out from the plaque, the female ghost inadvertently glanced at the small bookcases on the children's back. Her expression instantly changed, and an aura of hostility immediately erupted from her body. Even though she tried her best to suppress it, this was still easily noticed by everyone else. The young swordsman sighed and turned to glance at the young boy wearing straw sandals whom he had seen once on the ship traveling along the embroidered flower river. There was sincerity in his voice as he asked, "Can you children put the 3 bookcases away first?" It was because of Lady Chu's resentment toward scholars that she gave up the opportunity to become a mountain goddess or river goddess at that time. The reason behind this is truly difficult to explain in just a few words. Chen Ping'an, since no significant damage was done, I hope that you and your companions can show some mercy and rest this matter. What do you say? The young swordsman pondered for a moment before smiling and adding, "If that's okay, then you only need to agree to let me use an illusion technique." "Go ahead," Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. The 3 small emerald-green bookcases immediately disappeared from everyone's view. Of course, chi refiners would naturally be able to see them if they focused their gaze. The young swordsman returned his gaze to Wei Jin, the youngest cultivator at the upper 5 tiers in Eastern Treasured Vial Continent. Not only that, but Wei Jin was also a swordsman whose strength could be elevated by another level. He was yet to reach 40, yet he had already reached the upper 5 tiers. He was a supreme prodigy whose talents would astonish everyone, regardless of which continent he was in. This would be the case even if he were in the vast and magnificent Middle-earth Divine Continent. Among the young cultivators, Wei Jin from Wind Snow Temple and Song Chongjing from the Great Li Empire could be considered as the undisputed jade walls of the south and the north. One had broken through the 10th tier and become an 11th tier sword immortal, while the other had reached the legendary 10th tier of martial arts. Sure enough, they had both lived up to their expectations. One was a civil official, while one was a military officer. However, both of them possessed limitless potential for the future. The young sword immortal smiled and asked, "Apart from resolving the current issue, I wonder if Sword Immortal Wei has any other plans after traveling all the way to the Great Li Empire?" Wei Jin, who had traveled the world as a chivalrous swordsman the entire time, smiled and countered, "What does it matter if I don't have any other plans? And what does it matter if I do? If you simply plan to sightsee, then you're welcome to visit anywhere apart from the few restricted areas of the empire," the young swordsman replied frankly. "If you don't mind, I'm willing to act as your guide. However, if you have ulterior motives and wish to take advantage of the unrest in the Great Li Empire, then I'll stand here in your way and personally witness just how quick Sword Immortal Wei's flying sword is." Wei Jin returned his renowned sword, High Radiance, to its scabbard by his waist. "In Wind Snow Temple, I've always been the one who has respected Master Ruan the most. However, various reasons and circumstances have meant that I've been able to meet him. Thus, I accepted the task of accompanying these children to Yefu Pass on the border of the Great Li Empire, after receiving the message that Master Ruan sent from Jewel's small world. However, a senior called Aoyang provided me with some guidance regarding swordsmanship while I was traveling here, and it was because of this that I entered seclusion and advanced to the next tier. In other words, you don't need to worry about my trip to the north." The young swordsman opposite him was treating him with sincerity, and Wei Jin had always been an open-minded person to begin with. Thus, Wei Jin didn't treat the young swordsman's slightly stiff attitude as an act of provocation. Instead, he said with honesty to the young swordsman who possessed the impressive ability to move mountains, "If you want to spar with me, then I'm more than happy to accept your request. I initially thought that there was already no further need to travel around my home continent, the Eastern Treasured Vial Continent. After listening to Aoyang's stories about the outside world, I felt a strong desire to visit Stalactite Mountain, the place where Aoyang trained. I want to genuinely hone my skills with the sword. It was precisely because Wei Jin had traveled to many places and encountered many people that he was increasingly aware of the importance of the word perseverance. The blind old Taoist priest was unable to interject and say anything. He didn't dare to either. Just the widely renowned Wei Jin from Wind Snow Temple alone was able to stifle the old man who belonged to a heretical path. How rare were upper 5-tier cultivators in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent? One had to realize that 10th-tier cultivators were already powerful enough to become the pillars of nations and empires, with rulers and emperors treating them as esteemed guests who could help safeguard the fortunes of their lands. Which upper 5-tier cultivator wasn't as elusive as a divine dragon? These were supremely powerful cultivators who were capable of founding their own sects. Many empires and nations existed in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Yet how many immortal clans and forces were able to enjoy the title of sect? So few that they could be counted on fingers. Wei Jin cupped his fists and said to the young swordsman, "Till we meet again in the future." The young swordsman cupped his fists in reply, saying, "Hopefully news of your feats will travel from Stalactite Mountain to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent in the future." The two swordsmen exchanged a smile. Friends till old age, yet still like strangers. Friends from a chance encounter, yet already like bosom friends. Such was the meaning of these words. "Let's go," Chen Ping'an said softly. Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shui all nodded in reply. The blind old Taoist priest gritted his teeth and summoned his courage before asking in a careful voice, "Esteemed immortal, the two disciples of this weak Taoist have been invited into the residence by Lady Chu, so can you please allow me to collect them before I leave? This weak Taoist is simply worried that his crude and naughty disciples will accidentally break Lady Chu's household rules." The young swordsman turned to the female ghost and asked in a gentle voice, "Can you let them go, Lady Chu? Since you've already spoken, how could I possibly dare to refuse?" The female ghost replied with a nod. This guardian swordsman of the capital had been able to block Wei Jin's third strike by simply pushing his sword 1 inch out of its scabbard. He was far more powerful than he let on, and the female ghost in the wedding dress was keenly aware of just how fearsome he was. To put it simply, he wasn't someone that she could rival. This would most likely be the case even if she were at her peak, and had the protection of the surrounding mountains and rivers. In any case, she couldn't be regarded as a genuine 10th-tier cultivator, while it was unknown whether the strange swordsman from the Mahis sect was similar to Wei Jin, in the sense that he was already an 11th-tier terrestrial sword immortal. She was slightly aggravated as she peered at the young children. If it weren't for one of them preventing her from lighting the lanterns, and if she hadn't seen their detestable appearance as traveling scholars, how could she have possibly suffered such a miserable fate? To say nothing of the fact that she had been slashed apart twice by the attacks of Wei Jin. Even the root of the mountains and source of the rivers in her territory had almost been destroyed by that Yin god. Holding the leash of his white donkey, Wei Jin turned to Chen Ping'an and the others before smiling and asking, "Shall we head off now?" Chen Ping'an naturally had no issues. And thus, a new terrestrial sword immortal joined their group on this long journey to the north. Li Baoping walked up beside Chen Ping'an and said, "Junior uncle, what's wrong?" Chen Ping'an asked softly. Li Baoping giggled and replied, "Nothing." Chen Ping'an patted her head. The little girl in the red jacket walked next to Chen Ping'an. In reality, she was thinking of her eldest brother. With a wave of her hand, the female ghost casually plucked the lame young boy and the round-faced little girl from her garden and tossed them in front of the blind old Taoist priest. Afterward, she glanced out the corners of her eyes in some direction. Coincidentally, she saw the young boy in straw sandals also turning his head to glance back at her. The two of them locked eyes. Chen Ping'an's gaze was cold. For some unknown reason, Lady Chu suddenly felt a slight sense of apprehension at this moment. However, she quickly dismissed this as preposterous and comical. She quickly retracted her gaze, not willing to waste any more time on this ordinary young boy. She was confused as to why she was suddenly feeling slightly paranoid. Afterward, she subconsciously glanced back again. Yet the young boy in straw sandals had already turned around and slowly walked away. He naturally fell in line at the back of the group. In their fight over the 30-odd dragon kills in the small town, the 4 families and 10 clans in Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley had schemed endlessly and shed much blood over hundreds upon thousands of years. Now that the small town had become Dragon Spring County and opened up to outsiders, however, they had no option but to form an alliance and combine their powers. However, which of them wasn't privately contacting the imperial court and the immortal forces of the Great Li Empire? Some rumors spread like wildfire in the outside world, yet the families and clans in Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley didn't take them seriously at all. For example, people claimed that the Dragon, Qilin, and Phoenix of the Li clan had become nothing more than jokes following the death of Li Baoping's teacher, the master of Mountain Cliff Academy. Instead, they claimed, it was Zhao Yao and the other young scholars that the powerful families and clans in the small town didn't dare to underestimate. These were youths who had the potential to become immortals. However, it was said that the second son of the Li clan's clan leader, Li Baozhen, had encountered a powerful person in the capital. This person had made an exception and accepted him into the Imperial Academy as a disciple. Here he studied grand etiquette with Lu Wanhu, a renowned scholar in the imperial court. This had sent some small waves through the small town. As for Li Hong's eldest son, the only impression that the seniors in Fortune Street had of him was that he was a bookworm who had become stupid from reading too much. Meanwhile, his daughter Li Baoping was a crazy girl who always ran around outside. She had done so ever since a very young age. Apart from this, there was nothing special about Li Hong's eldest son and only daughter. Only his second son, Li Baozhen, had the chance to bring honor to the Li clan. In the study in the Li clan's residence, a young man with a distant expression handed a letter to his father, Li Hong. This was a letter from the capital city. Li Hong chuckled and remarked, "Baozhen is the same as his younger sister. He'd rather send letters to his older brother than send them to his own father and mother." The young man smiled bitterly and replied in a soft voice, "Father, you should mentally prepare yourself for what's written in the letter." Li Hong's expression instantly became solemn. He pulled the letter out of the envelope, and after skimming over the first few lines of greeting and small talk, his expression became increasingly dark the further down that he read. He stood up and lit an oil lamp, placing it inside the brush washer. He then held the letter over it, and the ashes fell into the exquisite plum blue brush washer. The man summarized his son's actions with 2 words: absolute farce. "What do you think about this matter?" Li Hong asked his eldest son. "Should we listen to your younger brother's suggestion and erase the lowly genealogical records of Zhu He and Zhu Lu's ancestors through the county office? Should we help them become commoners? If Zhu He and Zhu Lu manage to successfully change their status and erase their names from the lowly genealogical records of servants kept by the Li clan, then their children and grandchildren would no longer to become generational servants or maids either. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe this as a carp jumping a dragon's gate and completely changing their fortune. Those guarding the gate for the Prime Minister could also be regarded as 7th-rank officials. 1. In terms of who could achieve success and who could only meander at the same level, this was wholly dependent on the abilities of those who cast off the shackles of servitude and obtained freedom. If one were obsequious and untalented, then it would naturally be better for them to rely on more powerful people. If one were knowledgeable and able, then it would naturally be better for them to forge their own path. The young man smiled bitterly and replied, "Father, you've already made up your mind." Li Hong leaned back in his chair and raised his hands to massage his temples. "But I still want to hear your opinion. It's unsustainable if everyone in the clan wants to obtain wealth and opportunity from dangers and risks." There was a bright glimmer in the young man's eyes as he quietly sat there, and he replied, "The most challenging part of this is that one party will feel estranged from the clan no matter who father chooses to support. Thus, Baozhen's actions were incorrect. His decision to act on his own and leave the clan with no path of retreat is even more incorrect. His actions are unpleasant, and his maliciousness toward Chan Ping'an from Clay Vase Alley is the most incorrect." Li Hong's expression was complicated as he looked at his eldest son. As Baozhen's older brother, how could you not be aware of his temperament? Since you already knew that things would end up in such an awkward situation, why didn't you choose to accompany him to the capital at that time? Grandfather has entered seclusion, Baoping has left on a distant journey, and the small town is also undergoing major changes at this moment. Now is a critical time that will decide the future direction of the families and clans. The Li clan can't give itself a blind spot, the young man replied. My mind wouldn't be at ease if I left. And even if I do plan to leave, that can only be after the situation here has settled down and become clear. If there's no other option, then I can also choose to not participate in the imperial examination for a while. Li Hong nodded slightly when he heard the mature and level-headed analysis in the beginning. However, he instantly became worried when he heard the last few sentences from his eldest son. He sat up straight and exclaimed loudly, "You definitely can't do that. Recruiting scholars through the imperial examination is one of the most important policies of the Great Li Empire. This is no inferior to the imperial court's recruitment of immortal forces. Li Baozhen is more impatient than you, and before leaving home, he promised your grandfather and me that he would abide by the rules and refrain from using hidden schemes after leaving the small town. He promised that he wouldn't push his luck or take any risks. And what was the result? He's decided to act first and ask later, no? We have no option but to accept his farcical decisions. Since this is the case, your decision to delay participating in the imperial examination will slow the progress of the Li clan down by at least 3 years." The young man silently swallowed the words that had already reached the tip of his tongue. If he uttered these words, it would signify the end of his already strained relationship with his younger brother. Their relationship would hit rock bottom, and there would be no possibility of mending it ever again. Moreover, uttering these words would also be absolutely meaningless. This was because his father had already made up his mind. In the depths of his heart, he didn't disagree with his second son taking risks to seek opportunity and wealth, to get up early and work hard for 3 years on an incorrect path, or to lie low and wait for 3 years on a correct path. The effect that each would have on the clan and its 2 generations for the next 30 years went without saying. The young man left the study and walked down the spacious corridor that was decorated with elegantly carved patterns by himself. He suddenly heard the tinkles of a wind chime hanging from the eaves. He placed his hand inside his sleeves, shut his eyes, and tilted his head slightly upward. As he listened to the ethereal chimes, he murmured, "Having too many smart people around is also a bad thing." The scholar in azure was called Li Shisheng. Without the sinister interference from the female ghost, Chen Ping'an and his companions' trek through the mountain range became far smoother than before. There was a path in the ravine that led all the way to the female ghost's residence. This path should have been wide enough to allow 2 horse-drawn carriages to travel side by side. Yet it was now already filled with wild grass and covered in chilly mists. Even so, this was still far better than the path that they had arrived on after using the barrier-shattering talisman to leave the path to the underworld. That was a path where Chen Ping'an had needed to use auspicious talisman to slowly clear the vegetation to clear a path forward. The man who the female ghost had called a terrestrial sword immortal didn't speak after suddenly joining their group. Instead, the sword immortal from Wind Snow Temple's divine platform held the leash of his white donkey with one hand and held the hilt of his sword with his other hand as he walked with his eyes shut. Meanwhile, his mind wandered around in a distant place. If there existed a gulf between the lower 5 tiers and middle 5 tiers, then there undoubtedly existed the distance between heaven and earth between the 10th tier and the 11th tier. Even though 10th tier chi refiners were honored as esteemed pillars in mortal empires and nations, it was still necessary for them to cultivate in stillness and seclusion for dozens or even hundreds of years at a time. Only then could they somewhat enter the extreme stillness begets movement. This was a state that would allow them to advance to the 11th tier. However, among the chi refiners who left their clans and sects after entering this state, many would eventually fail to advance to the 11th tier. If this were the case, they would return to their clans and sects to continue cultivating in seclusion. Wei Jin silently stopped practicing the unique breathing technique of Wind Snow Temple. He opened his eyes and turned around to observe the children who were familiar with Aoyang. However, most of his attention was still focused on the memorial service in Wind Snow Temple. He was still unable to break free. It had already been many years since he had last visited his master's tomb and offered wine to him. After hearing the so-called bullshit little stories from Aoyang, Wei Jin was now yearning to visit Stalactite Mountain, the mountain that lay on the border between the 2 worlds. He was even more eager to visit that city wall, the great wall atop which countless sword immortals stood. Wei Jin heaved a sigh, feeling like he hadn't fought to his heart's content just then. If his physical body had already stabilized and flawlessly fused together with his sword intent while he was standing under the beautiful water noble wind plaque just then his final sword strike at the sword immortal from the Mahis sect wouldn't have contained any imperfections. In other words, the young swordsman from the Mahis sect would have needed to draw his sword by more than an inch. In fact, he would have needed to draw it at least halfway. Li Huai was extremely curious as he looked at the drifting gaze of the immortal in white. At the same time, he also felt very disappointed. How great would it have been if Aoyang were present? Li Huai wanted to pat Aoyang's shoulder and tell him that this was the definition of a powerful swordsman, and that he was still a small way off. He wanted to tell Aoyang to learn from Wei Jin. After all, just look at how Wei Jin had arrived. His sword had arrived before his person, and sword chi had hovered around his white robes. Afterward, he had pummeled the evil ghost woman until she started crying for her mother. Just how astounding and impressive was this? Was this something that Aoyang, who liked to wear a bamboo hat and walk next to the river with the white donkey, could achieve? Lin Shuyi noticed that Wei Jin was observing them. However, he also noticed that the swordsman from Wind Snow Temple was lost in some other thought. The aloof young boy quietly adjusted his bookcase and started to contemplate his own cultivation. Lin Shuyi's mind was heavy after experiencing the female ghost's unfathomable mystical abilities and witnessing the godly exchange between the two powerful swordsmen. There was still a long and arduous path before him. His measly cultivation base right now was not even enough to warrant a casual attack from them. Wei Jin retracted his drifting gaze before stopping and retrieving a smooth jade tablet from his sleeve. He smiled and said honestly, "I can't accompany you children all the way to Yefu Pass. I need to immediately head to Jewel Small World and use the dragon-slaying platforms there to sharpen High Radiance and my bonded flying sword. I need to prepare for my journey to Stalactite Mountain in the future." Aoyang told me that the place lying beyond Stalactite Mountain is experiencing an intense 100-year battle right now. This is something that I definitely can't miss. When Wei Jin saw none of the children step forward to accept the jade tablet, he patiently explained, "Even though you children are being accompanied by a relatively powerful Yin god, I still want to give you this jade tablet to help prevent any unexpected incidents like the one today. This is a unique peace and safety tablet from Wind Snow Temple in True Martial Mountain. If you encounter any trouble, you can simply activate the jade tablet with your chi and explain your situation to it. Once you release it, it will automatically fly to the sect and ask for assistance." Seeing that the children still refused to step forward to accept the important jade tablet, Wei Jin didn't scold them for being foolish and naive. Instead, he smiled and said, "If you feel like it will be safer with me accompanying you rather than having this small jade tablet, then I naturally won't turn down your request. I'm simply discussing the options with you. In terms of what you choose, this is completely up to you. Senior Sword Immortal, you can head to Dragon Spring County to search for the dragon-slaying platforms to sharpen your blades. We'll accept the jade tablet," Chun Ping'an said. "Senior Yin God has always planned to accompany us to Yefu Pass. The Imperial Court of the Great Li Empire has also granted us permission to head there without any obstructions. This is why the three cultivators appeared in front of the female ghost just then. Even though they were a little late, this still proves that they intend to keep their word." Chun Ping'an pondered for a moment before saying earnestly, "I'm sure that big incidents like the one today won't crop up again and again." He accepted the jade tablet and handed it to Lin Shuyi, saying quietly, "Remember to keep it safe. Also, it's best that you don't put it in the bookcase. Otherwise, it will be difficult to retrieve in emergency situations if you put it too far away." Lin Shuyi nodded and replied, "I understand. I'll place it in my sleeves next to the two remaining paper talismans." Wei Jin gave a knowing smile. He was slightly surprised by Chun Ping'an's reasonable nature. In fact, Wei Jin had been slightly puzzled about his position as leader just then. While standing on the street in front of the female ghost's residence, Wei Jin had already noticed that Lin Shuyi was someone who had set foot on the bridge to immortality. His acupoints were filled with vitality, and they were not only magnificent but also stable. He was a rare cultivation talent. Moreover, the young boy was also an aloof and proud person, so how could he be willing to listen to others? Yet, it seemed like he didn't have any problem with Chun Ping'an being their leader. As for the youngest and most mischievous child among them, There was naturally no need to comment on his good fortune, seeing that Aoyang had especially tasked him with looking after the white donkey. Because of this, Wei Jin would give him a parting gift no matter what. After traveling through so many nations unencumbered, Wei Jin had naturally come across all kinds of fated opportunities and obtained all manners of rare treasures. He had given most of them to fated individuals, so the only treasures he had right now were naturally the most precious ones. Moreover, after observing Li Huai through his limpid sword heart, sweeping away the foggy barrier that someone had purposely erected, Wei Jin discovered that Li Huai's innate aptitude was actually even better than Lin Shuyi's. He was a top-notch piece of jade that the militarian elders dreamed of obtaining. Appearing wreathed in white mist in the sword immortal Wei Jin's eyes, the little girl wearing the bright red jacket asked, "If this tablet encounters a situation like today, will it truly be able to fly away without being stopped? Will it be able to fly out of the path to the underworld and the night sky barrier that you shattered with your flying sword just then?" Wei Jin laughed heartily and explained, "Rest assured, even the sagely barriers of 10th tier cultivators won't be able to trap it. This jade tablet is extremely quick, much quicker than traveling atop a flying sword." As the jade tablet makes its way to Wind Snow Temple, the disciples of the sect who are traveling the world will summon it before them using a secret technique. Once they detect its presence, these disciples will often be willing to offer their assistance. Thus, most dangers are resolved without requiring any reinforcements from the sect. Li Baoping nodded and said, "I understand. The jade tablet itself is a kind of passport, an emblem. If even Signorine God can't defeat them, then these people definitely have powerful backgrounds. With their experience and age, they'll immediately recognize Wind Snow Temple's peace and safety tablet. As such, they'll definitely feel apprehension towards Senior Sword Immortal and your sect. So even if the Jade Tablet is unable to reach Wind Snow Temple, just its presence alone is already a type of deterrence. Showing this Jade Tablet is equivalent to warning others not to provoke Wind Snow Temple." Wei Jin faltered upon hearing this, astonished at the intelligence and understanding of the little girl. He immediately developed a good impression of Li Baoping, who was wearing a serious expression. Thus, he naturally found her friendly and adorable as well. In the end, Wei Jin unconsciously glanced at the young boy in straw sandals again. Perhaps he only became the leader because he's the oldest? Wei Jin shifted his gaze and looked at Li Huai, the little boy who had helped him look after the white donkey the entire time. After pondering for a moment, he flicked his wrists and summoned a row of small clay statues to his palm. They were only half a finger tall, with one being a swordsman with a sword by his waist, one being a Taoist holding a fly whisk, one being an armored warrior, one being a crane-riding woman, and one being a gong-beating watchman. There were 5 clay statues in total. These 5 clay statues can be regarded as semi-inanimate objects that have combined the profound puppet knowledge of naturalists and Mahists and the vast talisman knowledge of Taoists, Wei Jin explained as he handed the clay statues to Li Huai. "I don't understand the intricacies behind them, and I simply know that they might come to life one day if you look after them properly and familiarize them with your aura. Afterward, you'll need to continually feed them the essence of the 5 elements, fire spirit, water essence, and so on. Due to their small size and miniature acupoints, meridians, and so on, they can only reach a maximum cultivation base equivalent to 7th tier or 8th tier qi refiners." When he said this, Wei Jin realized that he had perhaps spoken too much. He stopped speaking, and he simply looked at Li Huai with a smile. The little boy didn't forget to turn his head to look at Chen Ping'an. The latter hurriedly nodded, and only then did Li Huai grab the 5 clay statues, thinking that he now had 6 small minions if he counted the painted puppet in his bookcase. Wei Jin jumped onto the white donkey and said, "Then farewell. I wish you all a safe and smooth sailing journey." Even though Wei Jin was generous and chivalrous, he couldn't be regarded as someone who would freely part with treasures and wealth. The path of cultivation was long, so who knew whether their brief and few encounters with others were positive fate or ill fate? With Wei Jin's powerful karmic fate, and with the intangible and undetectable will of the heavens, who knew what would happen if a person accepted Wei Jin's presence at an inappropriate time, and without the necessary karmic fate? If they weren't fated to receive such good fortune, perhaps these presents would instead bring them calamity and lead them to an early death? Why were immortals so stringent when they recruited disciples? In fact, some tests would even last dozens of years. Since these children had traveled with Aoyang before, Wei Jin believed that they were definitely no ordinary children. As for who Aoyang cared about the most, regarded the most highly, and had the highest hopes for, it might have been Li Huai, the little boy with a powerful background who was blessed with fortune, or it could have been the extremely likable little girl wearing the red jacket. It could also have been Lin Shuyi, the young boy who stayed true to his Dao heart. Any one of these options was possible. Or perhaps Aoyang had simply spread the love between the three children. However, the most pressing matter for Wei Jin right now was to head to Stalactite Mountain. Otherwise, he would miss the opportunity to witness that grand and lofty battle. If this weren't the case, he would have truly wanted to personally accompany these children to Yefu Pass. As a swordsman who had ambitions of reaching the pinnacle of the sword Dao, how could he let slip this 100-year opportunity? Chen Ping'an instinctively cupped his fists in respect. However, he habitually placed his left hand over his right hand due to his first experience on the ship traveling down the embroidered flower river. Now, however, it seemed like Wei Jin and the other young swordsmen both cupped their fists with their right hand over their left hand. This left Chen Ping'an feeling a little awkward. Afraid that he was breaking some kind of rule, Chen Ping'an hurriedly changed the placement of his hands. Wei Jin noticed this small detail, and after seeing the young boy's embarrassed expression, he couldn't help but chuckle. Bending down to pat his old companion's back, he said, "Let's go." The white donkey happily trotted forward. However, it suddenly turned around after taking a few steps, and it ran back to Chen Ping'an and nudged the young boy's face. Only then did it set off on the long journey with its owner. Even though Li Huai had been responsible for looking after the donkey, how could the little boy have the patience and determination to actually do so? Had it not been Chen Ping'an quietly feeding it, cleaning its nose and shooing mosquitoes and flies away? Chen Ping'an smiled and waved goodbye to the white donkey. The swordsman in white chuckled in surprise. He leaned back and bounced up and down with the cadence of his donkey. Okie dokie, as it turns out, this terrestrial sword immortal's relationship with others is even inferior to his old companions. Heaven and earth were barren. Bleakness and desolation pervaded. It was as if only a single wall remained between the sky and the land. This was a wall that stretched for an unfathomable length, and that towered to an inconceivable height. Even when looking over from 50 kilometers to the south, one could still clearly see the 18 large characters that had seemingly been engraved using sword qi. Judging from this fact, one could imagine just how colossal the characters were, and just how tall the Great Wall was. Dao Power, Grand Majestic Western Land. Thunderpool Restricted Land. Eternal Lasting Sword Qi. Qi Dong Chen. Fierce. Several hundred kilometers south of the Great Wall, the sound of a horn suddenly blasted through the air, as if it wanted to shatter the roof of heaven and earth. Countless dark shadows gathered together in a dense crowd. Following the sound of the horn, specks of fire started to appear, eventually transforming into a sheet of flickering light. If one looked over from an elevated position far in the north, what they would witness would be a sea of dazzling flames. Standing atop the city wall, an old voice rang out with dignity and might. "Swords, take flight!" Above that great wall that stretched for tens of thousands of kilometers and had rested here for a millennium, at this instant hundreds of thousands of flying swords flew over the city wall in unison and dashed toward the south, carrying with them trails of brilliant sword qi. It was as if flood water were crashing over a levee. What could encapsulate the stunning scenes of the world better than this? The young swordsman from the Mahist sect habitually rested his elbows on the hilt of his sword, and the tip of his sword scabbard as he stood under the plaque in front of the female ghost's residence. Even so, he didn't give off a feeling of exhaustion. "Lady Chu," he called softly. However, he didn't say anything else after this. The palace minister with the large lantern and the great river god of the embroidered flower river both slowed their breathing down at the same time, as if in tacit understanding. Their expressions were solemn. "What, you want to dish out punishment now?" the female ghost sneered. The young swordsman looked up at the location where Wei Jin's flying sword had pierced through the barrier. "Lady Chu, there's no need to utter such words out of anger. I have no intention of doing anything of the sort. However, I hope that you won't interfere with the children leaving this place or the blind old Taoist priest and his 2 disciples' journey up north. Regardless of whether your actions were intentional or not at that time, The Great Li Empire's Song clan has always felt gratitude toward Lady Chu. After all, your actions helped the Song clan extend the lifespan of the empire. Afterward, the Great Li Empire's Song clan also performed a deed that left them feeling guilty toward Lady Chu. Even though I didn't feel scorching rage and indignation after learning about that tragic event, as an outsider, I definitely still felt a sense of compassion. Silence. The female ghost raised a hand and twirled her hair, displaying her delicate and gentle nature as a woman. She smiled with squinted eyes and said, "And now you can explain your but." Sure enough, the young swordsman nodded and continued. But Lady Chu's act of wantonly killing scholars has become increasingly difficult to conceal. The truth will eventually come out, and something will eventually have to be done. For example, today. I don't dare to speculate what the Emperor will think, but if I ever hear about a scholar vanishing from here again, I'll definitely pay Lady Chu a visit and personally bring you to the water dungeons. Rest assured, the Emperor values relationships, but he definitely values rules even more. Moreover, no matter how much goodwill exists between people, this is something that can eventually be exhausted. The young swordsman sighed and said with a sincere expression, "Lady Chu, regardless of whether you believe this or not, I dearly hope that such a day will never arrive." The female ghost gazed into the distance, with her fingers lightly pinching the sleeves of her wedding dress. This was a rare moment of calm for her, and she replied in a gentle voice, "Seeing how you were willing to lower your voice and speak so patiently with a young boy, I believe you." After pausing for a long moment, her expression gradually became cold. "Right now, I promise not to kill passing scholars anymore. However, I hope you understand that I might not be able to control myself in the future if I unconsciously see those traveling and poem-reciting scholars. I'm not pleading with you, and I simply want to tell you the truth. You can punish me however you see fit at that time. Whether I'm captured and tossed into a water dungeon, or whether I sever the root of the mountains and source of the rivers first, we'll rely on our own abilities, and we'll bear the consequences of our own actions." "Deal," the young swordsman said with a smile. The great river god of the embroidered flower river wanted to say something, but he eventually chose to remain silent. Before leaving, the young swordsman turned to the great river god and said, "There's no need to cover up those matters anymore. You might as well tell Lady Chu the truth. After all these years, I'm sure that Lady Chu is aware of these events already. I'll take responsibility for anything that happens afterward, so you don't need to worry about the imperial court laying blame on you." The great river god cupped his fists and replied in a solemn voice, "Thank you. I'll definitely wade through fire and water for you in the future, even if it's for a private matter." The young swordsman waved his hand before soaring into the air, and leaving with Palace Minister Han. Lady Chu stood there and looked at the great river god, who was deeply trusted by the imperial court of the Great Li Empire, with slight disdain on her face. She didn't invite him into her residence, nor did she shoo him away. The great river god strode onto the steps and casually sat down, saying, "I know that you've always viewed us crude martial artists with disdain, so I'll try to keep things short. Your husband didn't betray your love for him. However, the imperial court of the Great Li Empire never told you the truth because they were acting in the interests of the empire. They were afraid that you would leave this place and leave no one to suppress the remnant aura of the divine water nation that's most concentrated at Go Table Mountain. It's because of this that the imperial court purposely led you to misunderstand that scholar." The sleeves of Lady Chu's wedding dress billowed, and her eyes became bloodshot and tears of blood trickled down her cheeks. However, her expression remained calm as she said, "Things have already come to this, yet you still want to deceive me? Do you really think I'm a 3-year-old toddler? Even though I've never set foot outside these mountains and rivers after he left, not going to Wanping County and Red Candle Town to enjoy the scenery of the mortal world, do you really think I'm deaf and unaware of what he did during his time at Lakeview Academy? Many passing scholars mention this, so I know exactly what he did. I know all about it. In the end, he fell in love with another woman. I'm fully aware that if he falls in love with someone, that means that he definitely loves them from the bottom of his heart," Lady Chu murmured. The great river god's expression was calm as he continued, "Then you should also know that as the first scholar from the Great Li Empire entering the academy through his own abilities, he was jointly targeted and pushed to a miserable state by many people in Lakeview Academy. In the beginning, they purposely heaped him with insincere praise. Some people spent large amounts of money to hire the most famous prostitute, asking her to pretend that she admired his talent. Through this, they then spread his name and built his reputation. They also asked the great Confucians of nearby nations to purposely treat him as a dear friend despite their age difference. At the same time, they made it such that each of his calligraphy works ended up as valuable as an entire city. They employed many other tactics, each tying in with the others. In the end, he was only half a step away from becoming the first noble person from the Great Li Empire officially recognized by the Confucian schools. However, everything was turned on its head in a single night. His reputation lay in tatters after someone accused him of plagiarizing poems. The renowned prostitute also slandered him as impotent and infertile. At the same time, several famous scholars and wise Confucians jointly attacked his articles on morals and virtue, accusing him of being a hypocrite and scolding him as a dreg of Lakeview Academy. Once full of spirit and vigor, the hugely talented scholar was driven mad just like that. He went crazy for a long time, and the scholar who had hailed from impoverished beginnings became the butt of jokes for the entire Lakeview Academy. The accusation of the Great Li Empire being a nation of northern barbarians became increasingly common and convincing. However, no one expected him to suddenly come to his senses in the end. The great river god of the embroidered flower river stopped and looked at Lady Chu, who was stuck in a trance. Do you know why he came to his senses? Lady Chu slowly sat down on the steps and spread her wedding dress to the sides, causing it to look like a bright red peony in full bloom. Was it because Qi refiners from the Great Li Empire helped him? The burly man chuckled, and there was a chilly look in his eyes as he bluntly replied, "If the Great Li Empire really did do something, they would have chosen to kill him instead." Lady Chu grimaced before nodding and saying, "He brought disrepute to the empire, so this does indeed make sense. The battle between empires causes people to resort to all conceivable means. This is only natural." The man exhaled and revealed, the scholar was only able to come to his senses because a woman whom he was familiar with arrived by his side. Lady Chu's body stiffened. The great river god slowly stood up and walked down the steps. That woman was wearing a face mask, one that looked exactly the same as Lady Chu. If I'm not wrong, then she emulated almost all of Lady Chu's voice, habits, and hobbies as well. If the scholar was targeted due to the conflict between the two empires before, then what toyed with his mind and eventually forced him to death was perhaps this battle between scholars. The great river god strode away as he revealed the final truth. After finding out the truth, the scholar decided to jump into the lake and commit suicide. It was that simple. Inferring from his conversations with his two best friends in the Imperial Academy before he departed for Lakeview Academy, we can conclude that he already knew that you weren't a human from a long time ago. It was because of this that he was determined to become a noble figure of Confucianism, a level above virtuous figures. Presumably, this would give him the confidence to ask the imperial court for a formal wedding with you once he returned to the Great Li Empire. The great river god had already left. Yet, the female ghost in the wedding dress who had committed far too many crimes to even record was still sitting on the steps, a serene expression on her face. Her movements were gentle as she fixed the folds on her sleeves, smoothing one area, folding another area. This was something that she would never grow tired of. Not long after Wei Jin left with his donkey, hurried shouts traveled over from behind Chen Ping'an and the others. These were shouts asking for their benefactors to please stop for a moment. Turning around, they saw that it was the blind old Taoist priest and his two disciples running after them. The old Taoist priest had experienced many hardships before, so he naturally knew that it was thanks to these children of unknown origin that he was able to safely make his way out of the mountain. However, who knew whether the eccentric female ghost would suddenly change her mind and decide to capture them again, offering them face-washing and heart-piercing services? According to his two disciples, there were genuinely rows of scholars planted in the garden of the residence. Moreover, some of them had seemingly pulled themselves out of the soil after much struggle. Looking at their skeletons, however, they were indeed pitiful people who had been cut in half at the waist. The old Taoist priest had hurriedly run over with the support of the round-faced little girl, and he was oblivious to the fact that his aged Taoist robes were already filled with thorns from the two sides of the path. He appeared as disheveled as could be. Truth be told, Even though the old Taoist priest's heretical lightning technique was indeed unable to suppress the female ghost, he would still definitely be regarded as an old immortal if he ever displayed his power in the mortal world. In fact, he was indeed honored as a mighty immortal quite often during their journey to the north. Even though he had been regarded as a talentless scammer in Three Twigs Mountain, this kind of miserable encounter was ultimately a very rare occurrence. The old Taoist priest no longer tried to appear mysterious like before. He squeezed a smile and asked, "Dare I ask, where is Wind Snow Temple's Great Sword Immortal Way?" This Taoist priest's mortal name is Suingzhen, and my Tao title is Xianguzi. I've looked up to Great Sword Immortal Way for a long time, and it's truly a silver lining that I'm able to encounter you here. Being able to personally witness those 3 magnificent and transcendent sword strikes was truly a most divine fortune. The terrestrial sword immortal has already left to travel to the north by himself, Lin Shuyi said with a cold smile. If you want to butter up to him, then you'd better hurry past us and continue up north. Perhaps you can still catch up to him. The old Taoist priest gave a forced smile and chuckled. If we've missed the opportunity, then we've missed the opportunity. Destiny has yet to bring us together, so we can't try to hasten things through force. Wei Jin was an immortal at the upper 5 tiers, belonging to a group of powerful people who were as elusive as dragons. The old Taoist priest was fully aware of his own abilities as well. Thus, even if he truly caught up to the swordsman from Wind Snow Temple, he would most likely only annoy Wei Jin and obtain no benefits either. To mortal humans, cultivators from immortal sects were naturally very rare. However, encounters between cultivators could all be regarded as events of destiny. This was indeed true. Yet, destiny could also be divided into good destiny and bad destiny, just like karmic fate could be divided into positive fate and ill fate. The old Taoist priest had captured demons and subdued fiends throughout his journey, and this was in order to accumulate hidden virtue for himself. He had engaged in 50-odd battles, and he was definitely relying on more than just his 5th-tier Qi refiner cultivation base and heretical lightning technique to remain alive and jumping. Noticing the awkward silence, the old Taoist priest hurriedly turned left and right and said with a smile, "Little Jor, little lame lad, hurry up and kowtow to thank your benefactors." The round-faced little girl was just about to kneel after hearing her master's command. Meanwhile, there was a dark expression on the face of the lame young boy who was holding the muddied banner. Chun Ping'an hurriedly stepped forward and lightly grabbed the skinny little girl's arms, saying with a smile, "There's no need." He then turned to the lame young boy and said, "Thank you for warning us on the mountain just then." The lame young boy was stunned, and his face surprisingly flushed slightly red in embarrassment. He mumbled and didn't know how to reply. In the end, he decided to directly turn his head around to face somewhere else. Just then, the lame young boy had faced the female ghost head-on and even engaged in close-quarter combat with her. Even though the gulf between their power had been huge, his aura hadn't withered as a result. Yet, who would have thought that he was such a shy and easily embarrassed young boy? The old Taoist priest was delighted. After kicking the lame young boy, he purposely put on an angry expression and scolded, "Pathetic little thing." Afterward, his voice became solemn as he said, "Benefactors, if you head south after leaving this mountain, you'll reach Three Twigs Mountain after traveling for approximately 1.5 days. However, remember not to travel through it at night. There's a powerful ghost residing in a tomb there, and it's unjustly occupying a blessed land and absorbing the ancestral blessing and spiritual energy of a family. If this weren't the case, the results of divination show that a member of the family's previous generation should have become a high-ranking official. The ghost has a relatively powerful cultivation base, and its strength can likely rival that of 4th-tier Qi refiners. Most importantly, it comes and goes like a shadow and is extremely difficult to capture. Using some kind of unknown sinister technique, it's also created a dozen or so corpse puppets. I fought against it before, and I fell at the final hurdle several times. Not only did I waste several precious lightning talismans, but I was even misunderstood as a scammer by the local residents. It was truly infuriating. Lin Shuyi's mind fluctuated slightly as he heard a secret warning from the Yin god. "You're skilled in the 5 lightning righteous technique? Taoist priest, which sect are you from?" he asked. The old Taoist priest felt slightly awkward. He felt like the aloof young boy was truly an amateur, who had only just entered the cultivation world and thus didn't understand the rules. After all, how could one ask about someone else's background so directly? This was a big taboo regardless of whether one was a Taoist cultivator or a martial artist. However, seeing that they had experienced hardships together, and since the terrestrial sword immortal Wei Jin had helped set them free, the old Taoist priest decided not to make a fuss about this matter. After some careful thought, he replied slowly, "This is a long explanation, so please bear with my rambling, benefactors. My home country is the renowned Southern Stream nation that promotes Taoism above all else. There's a large Taoist sect near the border, and this is the leading Taoist sect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. This sect possesses the Limpet Pond Blessed Land, one of the 72 blessed lands. Not only is the sect leader the imperial preceptor of Southern Stream Nation, the rulers of several surrounding nations have also personally visited the sect to confer him with the title of True Lord due to his mystical Tao powers and abilities. Indeed, he's honored as the highest-ranking True Lord in 4 different nations. Thus, this esteemed Taoist immortal is widely recognized as one of the 10 greatest immortals in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Truth be told, if Wind Snow Temple's Wei Jin had encountered this Taoist immortal before advancing to the next tier, he would have genuinely been unable to enjoy a level footing with him. Chen Ping'an and Lin Shuyi listened intently, not willing to miss a single word. No matter how strong one was, there was always someone stronger. This was especially the case regarding the title of True Lord. After all, hadn't Lu Jimao, an outsider who had entered the small town, enjoyed the title of River-Severing True Lord? However, Li Baoping and Li Huai were far more distracted than the other two. Li Baoping occasionally glanced at the round-faced little girl who was timidly hiding to the side of the blind old Taoist priest. She appeared too shy to face others. The blind old Taoist priest was in a great mood to speak, and with little Jior's help, he unconsciously walked between Chen Ping'an and Lin Shuyi. Spittle flew as he continued. Forces that can be called sects are generally divided into 3 levels: ancestral sects, formal sects, and lower sections. Among them, ancestral sects are often referred to as ancestral temples. As for lower sects, these sects often have many subordinate forces. However, their naming conventions for these forces are far more relaxed as long as they don't use the word sect without authorization, or use the titles of other teachings. For example, Taoist temples, Buddhist temples, and so on. These forces simply need to offer tributes to the lower sects and maintain good relationships with the mortal empires. By doing this, they can find themselves a good piece of land to cultivate in peace. They can also recruit talented disciples to pass on their teachings. I've come from Truth-Seeking Temple, which used to be one of the top-notch forces in Southern Stream Nation. However, it started to decline around 100 years ago, and when it came to my generation, almost all of my seniors rode their cranes to the west. Only a few of us remained. Moreover, none of us achieved any great success. I'm not afraid of being laughed at, and I'll admit that the 5 lightning righteous technique of Truth-Seeking Temple is indeed not the formal lightning technique. We focus on cultivating the acupoints in the liver and the gallbladder, and our knowledge is wholly focused on the character's breath and smile. This draws from the phrase, "A breath forms clouds and rain. A smile summons thunder and lightning." Upon successfully learning this technique, one will be able to witness rising clouds and rain and booming thunder and lightning when using their mind's eye to observe their acupoints. After experiencing these miraculous phenomena, one will be able to achieve resonance with heaven and earth. Raising their hands and lifting their feet, one will have the ability to summon divine lightning to punish evils and sins. Of course, these heretical techniques from Truth-Seeking Temple are nothing more than ridiculous jokes compared to Great Sword Immortal Wei's powerful sword strikes that can shatter all techniques. Lin Shi frowned and asked, "The 5 organs consist of the heart, liver, spleen, lung, and kidney. Only when gathering the aura of these 5 organs, as if gathering 5 bolts of lightning, can one unleash a formal technique of the Great Tao. So why does your temple focus on cultivating the gallbladder, which is external to the 5 organs, as a method of summoning lightning?" The awkward expression on the blind old Taoist priest's face was definitely genuine this time. He heaved a heavy sigh, and there was exhaustion on his face as he replied in exasperation, "We had no option but to do this. The 5 lightning righteous technique is a secret technique of the formal sect, not taught to any external forces. To put it bluntly, even if an outsider manages to get their hands on this technique, Who would dare to practice it without authorization? Truth-seeking temple focuses on cultivating the acupoints in the liver and the gallbladder. However, even the cultivation techniques regarding the liver are nothing more than shallow methods coincidentally learned by one of the previous masters of the temple. These methods are barely similar to the genuine ones in physical form, and they're completely devoid of any similarity in terms of aura. This is why there are so few formal sects and formal branches in the world, yet so many heretical forces and heretical techniques. So that's how it is, Lin Shuyi exclaimed in realization. The Great Tao is difficult to navigate, and this difficulty is born from the fact that there exists far more than just a few thousand muddy and winding paths. The old Taoist priest sighed with sincere emotion. It's precisely because the temple's lightning technique is a heretical one that cultivating it results in both benefit and harm. This is similar to how naturalists will be subject to formless punishment from the heavens if they reveal divine secrets. Because of this, we often choose to recruit disciples with congenital disabilities to the temple. The heavens take pity on these people, so it's less detrimental for them to frequently use the lightning technique from truth-seeking temple, which harms the essence of both the liver and the gallbladder. We don't have extravagant wishes of attaining immortality, but if their fortune is good enough, they can at least enjoy a peaceful life and a comfortable death due to old age. According to rumors, once a chi refiner from that large continent unleashes their formal lightning technique, thunder guardians and lightning goddesses, rain gods and wind deities, Taoist enforcers and wind officials, all kinds of divine beings will appear and listen to their command, helping them gather more power and momentum. Can you imagine this? After unleashing such an extravagant technique, how can the mountains and rivers not change color? The blind old Taoist priest was filled with vigor as he described these things that had absolutely nothing to do with him. He didn't appear dejected or despondent in the least. Even though cultivation was as difficult as ascending the heavens, this was perhaps one of the main reasons why people still flocked over and clamored to cultivate. After setting foot on the path of cultivation and stepping onto the bridge to longevity, and after witnessing or hearing about the stunning sceneries atop the mountains, the ability to attain immortality, the chance to learn profound techniques, the power to summon wind and rain, the strength to move mountains and flip seas, and the existence all kinds of peculiar and unimaginable sights, who would still be willing to toil away in the stifling miasma of the mortal world? The old Taoist priest sighed and explained, I've traveled all over the place with my 2 disciples for the past few years, and we've subdued demons, vanquished fiends, captured ghosts, and exorcised evil many times. Moreover, we receive our payment in silver. There's nothing we can do about this, as cultivating requires us to seek wealth. After all, constructing a bridge to immortality is the greatest money burner in the world. Even if powerful and influential clans are experiencing trouble from evil spirits, I have no background to speak of, nor do I have anyone to help recommend me. Thus, I'm naturally unable to enter their residences to help them. When wealthy local families perform the liberation rite of water and land one, they'll only invite monks and Taoists that are renowned in their area. They don't trust outsiders. However, I can't unleash my lightning techniques to frighten the mortals and prove that I'm not a scammer, can I? Thus, I have no option but to do what I do. If we succeed in defeating the demons, we won't necessarily earn much silver. If we fail, however, we'll definitely lose more than we earn. Cultivation is truly difficult. They chatted as they walked, and when they finally came to their senses, they realized that they had already left the cage-like ravine. Perhaps this was merely an illusion, but they felt like the surroundings had suddenly become radiant and beautiful once again. They no longer felt the dense aura of coldness and darkness from just then. After a while, Chen Ping'an discovered that the blind old Taoist priest was showing no signs of leaving even though he had already stopped talking. He continued to trek south with them. In the end, Chen Ping'an couldn't help but ask, Taoist priest, isn't your destination to the north? The old Taoist priest laughed loudly and replied, no hassle, this is nothing but a small delay. We're unable to repay you for saving our lives, so just think of this as me and my 2 disciples seeing our benefactors off. This is only a matter of walking a few more steps. Afterward, the 2 groups of travelers continued to walk south just like that. Everything was smooth sailing, and they didn't encounter any more troubles. When they eventually left the mountain range, the blind old Taoist priest finally breathed a sigh of relief. He casually found a place on the side of the path to sit down. The round-faced little girl with the nickname Zhuhou hurriedly handed him some water. Meanwhile, the lame young boy stood behind the old Taoist priest and turned his head to gaze at the mountain range. No one knew what he was thinking about. Before parting ways, the old Taoist priest retrieved a well-kept silk scroll from his luggage and personally handed it to Chen Ping'an. This scroll is the mountain scouring album, handed down in the temple. Almost 100 different types of mountain ghosts and spirits are recorded in it, and you can use this album as a reference in your future travels. This is the first time you children have embarked on a long journey to seek knowledge, and it's also inevitable that you'll cross many mountains during your travels. So, perhaps this album will be of use to you in the future. I've already memorized everything on it, so its only value to me is a sentimental one. That being the case, it's better for me to give it to you children. That way, we can make the most of this mountain scouring album, and also leave everyone happy. Lin Shui tugged Chen Ping'an's sleeve. Chen Ping'an understood his intention, and he reached over to accept the mountain scouring album. However, he also retrieved the only remaining snake gall pebble on him, and gifted it to the lame young boy. He simply said that it was a local specialty from his hometown that wasn't worth any money. It was simply something rare. The lame young boy initially wanted to refuse this gift, yet the blind old Taoist priest hurriedly told him to accept it. He said that this was some goodwill from their benefactor. The extremely introverted young boy had no option but to quietly accept. He wanted to speak, yet he couldn't bring himself to do so. In the end, he was still too shy to utter the words "thank you." Chen Ping'an smiled and said, "After passing Red Candle Town and Go Table Mountain, you'll arrive in a place called Dragon Spring County. When you get there, you can go to the Burklover shop or the pastry shop and look for a girl called Ruan Xiao. If you show her this snake gall pebble, she'll understand that you're friends of mine. Perhaps she'll even help you settle down in the small town. When I arrive at the next relay station, I'll make sure to write a letter to her to explain the situation." They parted ways after this, and the blind old Taoist priest chose to take a detour rather than enter that mountain range again. He refused to set foot in that place again. They continued to head south, and Chen Ping'an turned his head to look back. He then slowly retracted his gaze. Chen Ping'an suddenly wanted to practice swordsmanship. If life were compared to a river, then these chance encounters were like passing currents that would quickly go their own ways after a brief moment of entanglement. The blind old Taoist priest with the Tao title Xian Guzi remained silent for a long time afterward. His disciple Zhuhou was slightly unaccustomed to this. Even though the lame young boy was unwilling to hand the snake gall pebble over, he still decided to offer it to his ill-tempered master after a moment of hesitation and conflict. The old Taoist priest accepted the smooth and exquisite pebble, and carefully caressed it in his palm for a moment. After this, he surprisingly returned it to the young boy and said, "Here, keep it for yourself." The lame young boy was completely baffled as he accepted the pebble. He looked at little Zhuhou, yet she subtly shook her head to signify that she didn't understand their master's thoughts either. "Little lame lad, this is your fated opportunity, and it's not something that your master can take away. If I truly attempted to, then that would only lead to bad consequences," the old Taoist priest explained. "Why do you think that young boy, Chen Ping'an, is going to send a letter to Dragon Spring County when he reaches the next relay station? If I were to hazard a guess, then I'd say that our stay in Dragon Spring County will be a miserable one if I'm the one to retrieve that pebble in the pastry shop or Burklover shop instead of you. Perhaps they won't try to make things difficult for us, but it will definitely become challenging for us to settle down. It will be even harder for us to find a mountain to cultivate in." "Oh," the lame young boy replied. He wasn't a cunning person, so he naturally wasn't good at understanding these matters. The blind old Taoist priest rubbed the little girl's head and said, "You two are truly blessed by good fortune." Little Zhuhou was more observant than her older brother, and she asked, "Master, do older sister and her companions have powerful backgrounds?" The old Taoist priest nodded and replied, "The Dragon Spring County that the young boy mentioned was formed after Jewel's small world that hung in the sky above the Greatly Empire shattered and fell to the ground. The Confucian sage Qi Jingchun overlooked this small world for 60 years. Those children with bookcases were all extremely smart, and they said that they were on a long journey to the academy in Great Sui Nation. That being the case, Who can they be the disciples of? The little girl was slightly envious as she said, disciples of a Confucian sage. How impressive. If this weren't the case, would Wind Snow Temple's Wei Jin have rushed over to rescue them immediately after advancing to the next tier and exiting seclusion? The blind old Taoist priest sneered. In any case, those children were being guarded by a Yin god who could surprisingly threaten the mountain roots and river sources of that ferocious female ghost. None of those children are simple people. There was emotion in his voice as he remarked. Their future potential is limitless, absolutely limitless. Little Jior suddenly realized something in hindsight, and she asked in curiosity, since Master already knows that they have a powerful guard, then why did you still take the unnecessary step to warn them about the powerful ghost in Three Twigs Mountain? They didn't need to worry about this to begin with. The old Taoist priest reached over to pinch her cheeks out of habit. He chuckled and said, "Foolish girl, this is called doing others a favor at no cost. We can act as good people without spending a single copper coin, so why not do it? But if they see through Master's thoughts, then won't that be making the situation worse by doing something unnecessary?" The little girl asked timidly. The old Taoist priest was rendered speechless. He shook his head and sighed. In the end, he patted little Jior's head and said, "Master needs to treat you two better in the future. During these years, I've always dreamed about striking great fortune and finding myself a supremely talented disciple from the side of the streets. I've always grumbled about you two having a bad background. However, looking back now, it seems like I'm the one who's been blind to your talents." The little girl felt slightly afraid. Her master appeared far too unfamiliar at this moment. Her face was slightly pale and she asked, "Master, have you been possessed by a ghost? Jior can hardly recognize you." The old Taoist priest roared with laughter. He suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Little Jior, Master promised not to collect talisman spring water from you for the next 1 year before. Let's discuss this again now. Can we change it from 1 year to half a year? What do you say? Just think about it. For the past while, it seemed like the demonic forces have always been one step ahead of us. Not only was I viciously beaten by the female ghost, but the banner also lost 4 of its 8 characters. In addition to this, I also parted ways with the mountain scouring album that was passed down to me by the seniors in the temple. As my disciples, shouldn't you two show some care for your master? Shouldn't you offer me some things out of piety?" The little girl felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. This was the master that she was familiar with. Thus, she didn't hesitate at all before replying, "Then let's change it to half a year." The lame young boy carefully put the pebble away. "The pebble is already mine," he said in a gloomy voice. The blind old Taoist priest was extremely peeved, and he shouted in anger, "Dogs can't change their habit of eating shit when—" The little girl covered her mouth and giggled. The little lame lad also started to chuckle. The Yin god revealed his true body when they reached a place with few people. However, his body was still blurry, with black smoke lingering around his figure. Yin energy exuded from him as he apologized in a hoarse voice, saying, "I wasn't able to protect everyone, and I even allowed you to be led to the female ghost's residence. I'm sorry." Chun Ping'an was genuinely at a loss regarding how to console him. After trying to find the right words for half a day, he finally said, "It's okay as long as you try your best." There was a somber smile on the Yin god's face as he said, "No matter what, it was my fault this time. This is especially the case since it was my act of prioritizing my cultivation that caused you children to end up in such a perilous situation. I truly can't forgive myself. If anything untoward were to happen, I wouldn't have complained even if I perished together with the female ghost after obliterating the root of the mountains and source of the rivers." Li Baoping smiled and said, "When I was little, Big Brother always liked to tell me all kinds of strange things. One time, he told me about the story of a city god. He said that the method of weighing up hidden virtue is slightly different. I remember this very clearly. For a good deed that is intended, there is to be no reward. For an evil deed that is unintended, there is to be no punishment. One's ability is limited, so since you tried your best in both thought and action, there's no need for you to feel too guilty. Otherwise, how tiring would that be?" The Yin god was rendered speechless. He couldn't help but feel slightly uncomfortable about being lectured by a little girl. Even though she had displayed the aura of a noble person not long ago, Li Baoping became lost in her own world again, and she was slightly annoyed as she hammered her palm with her fist. Big brother always liked to talk about these strange and peculiar things, and I simply treated them as interesting stories at the time. If I knew better, then I would have listened to them more carefully. Chen Ping'an wanted to say something, yet he eventually chose not to. The Yin god looked at him and asked with a smile, "Can we have a private conversation?" Chen Ping'an nodded, and he told Lin Shuyi and the others to continue forward first. After waiting for Lin Shuyi and the others to walk 300 or so meters away, the Yin god finally said, "It was old man Yang from the medicine shop who asked me to protect Li Huai." Chen Ping'an scratched his head and said, "Oh, I initially thought you were accompanying us to protect Baoping or Lin Shuyi. Li Huai's father Li Er almost killed Song Changjing. He's very powerful," the Yin god replied with a smile. There was one time when Li Er went to old man Yang and said that his wife had been bullied by others, so he needed to find the ancestors of those people to exact revenge. Because of this, he needed to leave Zhuhou's small world. Old man Yang couldn't dissuade him, so he could only reluctantly agree in the end. Afterward, I heard that a powerful immortal force in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent had its ancestral hall forcefully destroyed by Li Er's fists. Moreover, he had fought his way up to the mountaintop all the way from the mountain foot. Chen Ping'an's jaw dropped when he heard this. Didn't everyone call Li Er the most good-for-nothing man on the west side of the small town? In fact, even his son Li Huai thought this. Then why doesn't Li Er tell Li Huai about this? Chen Ping'an asked with a perplexed expression. The Yin god's mood seemed to improve significantly after starting to talk about Li Er, and he replied, "Li Er is someone who has a tendency to become extremely stubborn and fixated on things. Otherwise, he wouldn't have married that woman." Chen Ping'an laughed happily and remarked, "Li Huai will definitely be overjoyed when he learns the truth." "You're not planning to tell Li Huai about this?" the Yin god asked. "When we were at Pillow Relay Station, you directly revealed the truth behind Zhu Lu and her father's departure to Li Baoping, even though Aoyang encouraged you not to tell her so soon." Chen Ping'an slowly continued forward and he replied, "That was something directly related to me, so since I felt like it was correct to talk about it, I could naturally make this decision myself. However, since Li Huai's father is unwilling to tell his son about this, who am I, an outsider, to interfere? Would I tell Li Huai the truth just to make him a little bit happier? This isn't right." The Yin god nodded in understanding. He recalled the time when Li Er had viewed this young boy from Clay Vase Alley in higher regard than those other supreme prodigies. In fact, Li Er had even been willing to break the rules as he attempted to give the golden carp and the Dragon King basket to Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an suddenly stopped in his tracks, asking, "My eyesight is very good, and I was also worried that you were a bad person at the start. So I vividly remember that during our first encounter, Senior Yin God looked at me before looking at Li Huai. Why was that? Was it simply unintentional or?" If you don't want to answer this, then just pretend that I didn't ask. If the Yin God were still a living person, then he would definitely be parched and feel like he was sitting on a bed of needles at this moment. Back at that time, how could he have imagined that Chen Ping'an was such a perceptive person? His gaze had only rested on the young boy for a split second, and it could be said that he had concealed it very well. However, the Yin God quickly accepted this when he thought about Chen Ping'an's performance throughout this journey. It was most likely because of this that Chen Ping'an was able to win the trust of his companions. Even though Lin Shui had already reached the middle 5 tiers and become a genuine immortal, Li Baoping still wouldn't listen to him, and neither would Li Huai. As for the Yin God, he would most likely be no exception either. In his eyes, Lin Shui was ultimately nothing more than an extremely intelligent and talented junior. This was a very strange feeling. It was as if Chen Ping'an possessed an aura that could cause others to feel at ease with the situation, and unquestioning of his position. If he labeled something as incorrect, then his companions would also feel that the matter was incorrect. If he said that something could be done, then his companions would also feel that the task could be done. However, this wasn't the strangest part. What was even stranger than this was the fact that Chen Ping'an had never tried to deliberately flaunt any of his skills. Quite the contrary, in fact. He would humbly learn characters and how to read from the little girl who called him junior uncle, and he had never treated Li Huai as an immature little child either. He was also willing to chat with Lin Shui, and listened to his stories about the outside world. The Yin god smiled and replied, "I won't answer this question for the moment. However, you can rest assured that I won't try to harm you." Chen Ping'an jogged forward, not forgetting to turn around and say with a smile, "I wouldn't have asked this question if I didn't trust you." The Yin god slowly concealed his figure, sighing as he did so. Accompanying these children on a long journey was truly taxing on the mind. In reality, the ill-natured maidservant Zhuhou would have been considered a fairly impressive prodigy if she were placed in some ordinary force in a mortal empire. However, it was a shame that she was far inferior to everyone else in this group of children. In fact, she was inferior in all facets. During their journey south, they had first passed Dragon Whisker Creek and the Iron Talisman River before passing the Embroidered Flower River and the rushing Tranquil River. They had passed more waterways than they had mountains. For the next 1.5 days, however, it was as if they had used up all of their waterway luck. They could barely find a single stream in the mountains. They did indeed come across some water, yet these were all puddles of stagnant water that were undrinkable. They passed many sickly willow seedlings that were neither tall nor luxuriant. Instead, many of them were crooked and lying on their sides. Insects buzzed around, and the environment was as uncomfortable as could be. Li Huai was a little scared. This was because the blind old Taoist priest had made an inauspicious remark about them needing to pass through a ghost-ridden area called Three Twigs Mountain. Not only was there a malicious ghost here, but there were even Yin corpses acting as its subordinates. Li Huai couldn't help but feel depressed when he thought about this. His painted puppet and clay statues were far too small, so it was very likely that their fighting abilities would be insufficient even if they truly came to life. Moreover, the 5 clay statues that Wei Jin had given him wouldn't come to life no matter how he warmed them up in his hands. That sword immortal in white wasn't a liar, was he? He wasn't willing to part with a genuine treasure, yet he didn't want to affect his image as a sword immortal, so he had purposely told him a big lie? Dusk fell and Chen Ping'an stopped to craft a makeshift stove to cook dinner. Li Huai ran off to collect a large bundle of dry sticks. Afterward, he squatted down next to Chen Ping'an and complained, "Chen Ping'an, I feel like Wind Snow Temple's Wei Jin isn't as good as Aoyang." Chen Ping'an ignored him. Li Huai ran back to his bookcase and retrieved the painted puppet and a clay statue. He then used the painted puppet to viciously bully the sword-wielding clay statue. After a while, he placed the clay statue on its knees and pretended that it was begging for forgiveness. At the same time, he shouted, "Oh mighty female ghost, please spare me. I, Wei Jin, understand my sins." Chen Ping'an didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, he could only explain, "Wei Jin is a very good person." Li Huai rolled his eyes, and his hands continued to chaotically move around as he used the painted puppet to ravage the clay statue. Lin Shui was sitting on a nearby rock and flipping through the mountain scouring album. He looked up at Chen Ping'an and said, "If my observations weren't wrong, then it seemed like Wei Jin was somewhat looking down on you. Or more precisely, he was least optimistic about your abilities." Li Baoping, who was quietly tidying her small bookcase, was infuriated upon hearing this. For real? Lying on the floor with his bottom raised, Chen Ping'an slowly kindled a flame in the pile of firewood. Leaning back into a squat and preparing to cook dinner, he asked, "Does him looking down on me change the fact that he's a good person?" Li Huai was stunned. "Chen Ping'an, what are you thinking? How can someone who looks down on me be a very good person? They can only be a not-so-good person." Chen Ping'an's movements were methodical as he started to busy himself with cooking. Wei Jin is such a powerful person, and he's even referred to as a terrestrial sword immortal by others. Yet, his tone was still gentle and polite when he spoke to us, and he was even willing to explain the situation and the facts to us children. Do you think all immortals are like this? No, they're not. Before leaving the small town, I came across an immortal who would kill others on a whim, and who would only listen to their own reasoning. In fact, I came across more than just one. Chen Ping'an briefly mentioned those deadly encounters, yet he wasn't willing to expand on them any further. If you don't want to be looked down on by others, then you can only rely on yourself. If you're the best at planting crops, the best at firing pottery, the strongest when chopping firewood, or courageous enough to lead the charge when competing for water with the other alleys, then you naturally won't be looked down on by others. Chen Ping'an glanced at the others and continued, "This was the case in our hometown. However, things will be slightly different when we reach the academy in Great Sui Nation. If Li Baoping is good at studying, and if Lin Shui becomes an impressive cultivator at a young age, then you two naturally be held in high regard by the others. As for you, Li Huai, you're still little, so you don't need to worry about this yet." "Chen Ping'an, you might not be worried, but I am," Li Huai exclaimed anxiously. "Can you wake up earlier in the morning to practice walking meditation and fist techniques with me?" Chen Ping'an asked. "Of course not," Li Huai replied without any hesitation. "Then I'll teach you standing meditation?" Chen Ping'an offered. There was a look of disgust on Li Huai's face as he replied, "Why do I have to learn that? I'm still so little." "Oh, so you know that you're still little now? Then why were you so worried just then?" Chen Ping'an asked in exasperation. Li Huai was completely dumbstruck. After mulling over this for a long time, he was still unable to offer any response. In the end, when they were all sitting around to eat dinner, Li Huai used his chopsticks to grab a pickle and down a large mouthful of rice before asking, "Say, is there a cultivation shortcut that can allow one to achieve success overnight? For example, a method where I can cultivate today and become an immortal tomorrow?" Aoyang said that there isn't. "If I knew earlier, I should have asked Wei Jin about this as well. What if Aoyang doesn't have such a method but Wei Jin does? Then I would have struck gold. For the remainder of our journey, I could have traveled atop a flying sword and whoosh. I would fly here and there, even faster than Chen Ping'an's walking meditation. I would have been like a gust of wind. You guys would have only been able to trail behind me and eat my dust." "Who's going to eat dust?" Li Baoping asked with a stern expression. Li Huai gulped and looked at Lin Shui. He then silently turned his head to look at Chen Ping'an. In the end, Li Huai felt a little downcast. However, a brilliant idea suddenly sprang into his mind, and he hurriedly picked his painted puppet up from the ground. "She's going to eat it. She's my most powerful general right now. After all, she's the biggest, the most beautiful, the most experienced, and also the most decorated. She's accompanied me on my expedition for the longest time. Those 5 dirty little clay statues can only rank 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 6th. Then what about the little creatures in Severed Water Cliff?" Lin Shui asked with a smile. "Them? I don't like them very much," Li Huai replied with a shake of his head. "It's because you don't like to read, isn't it? That's why you're unwilling to see them. Because you need to open the book first," Li Baoping said, revealing the true reason. Li Huai pretended that he couldn't hear her. Chen Ping'an looked up and glanced at the slightly taller Three Twigs Mountain in the distance. "What does everyone want to buy after we pass Three Twigs Mountain and arrive at the next town?" he asked. "Junior uncle, I want to buy some miscellaneous books," Li Baoping answered in excitement. Mr. Qi said that apart from Confucianism, the 100 schools of thought also have their own classics that are worth a read. Mr. Qi said that rocks from other mountains can also be carved into jade. 3. Chen Ping'an, if it's possible, I want to buy a go set. The cheapest one will do. What about you, Li Huai? If I don't buy anything, can you give me the money instead? I want to save some money. Mother taught me that having some money in the pockets will keep one calm in the face of all kinds of situations. What do you think? Chen Ping'an replied. Li Huai chuckled and said, I was just trying my luck. After all, what if you suddenly discovered your conscience? Chen Ping'an chuckled coldly in reply. Li Huai's expression instantly froze, and he hurriedly changed the topic and said, Didn't that old Taoist priest tell us not to enter Three Twigs Mountain during the night? Lin Shui shook his head and explained, Senior God Chen Ping'an, and I have already discussed this before. If that malicious ghost comes out to attack us when we're traveling through Three Twigs Mountain at night, then we'll simply face it head-on and suppress it. Senior God will stay hidden first, and he'll let me try to defeat the malicious ghost using my talismans and lightning technique. This is in order to give me some training. If the malicious ghost stays in hiding, however, then we'll just let it be. We'll continue on our way. Night fell, and the four children slowly ascended the mountain. Three Twigs Mountain wasn't tall, yet its slope was gentle and very long. Chen Ping'an purposely took a detour as well, since there were large expanses of unmarked graves in the mountain. Of course, there existed even more marked graves that were frequented and cleaned by their descendants. There were tombstones decorating these graves, and these tombstones were also engraved with words. Shreds of paper money that weren't fully burned lay scattered across these graves. They traversed 3 Twigs Mountain in under 2 hours. Apart from the night breeze being slightly cold, they didn't encounter any other strange matter. Lin Shui felt slightly disappointed. However, he wouldn't try to forcefully seek a fight either. Afterward, their journey to Yefu Pass on the border of the Great Li Empire became even more smooth sailing. When passing through the market of a small town, Li Baoping bought 5 or 6 miscellaneous books, some of them being travel journals, some of them being Buddhist or Taoist classics, and some of them being the notes of literati. Lin Shui bought a Go set, and after teaching Chan Ping'an the rules, they would frequently play with each other whenever they had free time. This was because Li Baoping was too impatient and always wanted to play 7 or 8 pieces in a single turn. Not only that, but she also complained that Lin Shui was too slow. As for Li Huai, he was simply too lazy to use his brain. Surprisingly, however, it was the Yin god who played Go with Lin Shui the most. The memory of spending almost 10 taels of silver to buy a crappy book in Red Candle Town was most likely still fresh in Li Huai's memory. Thus he chose to not buy anything this time. Even though Chan Ping'an wanted to practice swordsmanship, he didn't genuinely begin to do so apart from occasionally retrieving the locust wood sword from his basket. In his view, the most important thing right now was to hone his fist technique. Only after he felt like he had the spare attention would he start to practice the sword. Regarding the qi channeling technique that Aoyang had taught him, Chan Ping'an had only managed to reach the halfway mark. He was unable to make it past the 6th stop no matter what. Even though he couldn't practice the sword for the moment, Aoyang had told him that the 18 stops was a technique created through much hardship by countless swordsmen. Diligently practicing the 18 stops was equivalent to laying a solid foundation for his sword practice in the future. Whenever he thought about this, Chan Ping'an would feel reinvigorated and filled with enthusiasm. Whenever he had free time, whether he was on a large branch atop a mountain or on the edge of a cliff beside the water, the young boy would form hand seals and perform standing meditation by himself, silently cultivating as he gazed at the mountains and waters. Where there were mountains, he would gaze at mountains. Where there was water, he would listen to water.